Welcome to the Soldier Fund podcast, the platform for untold stories from the National Guard Special Forces community. Join us as we delve into the lives of these elite warriors and the journey of our nonprofit, dedicated to supporting their courageous mission to free the oppressed worldwide. I'm your host, Ben Derrick. Let's dive in. Jordan, the podcast continues.
We're back at it.
You're back in. And by the way, before the mics turned on, you were pretty rude to me, but we're going to leave it there.
Yeah, we won't bring it up. That's fine.
Yeah. Is that a thing? Green Berets just they're rude when at will?
I think so, man. You get a green hat and a healthy dose of sarcasm at graduation. So
it's actually a good sign.
Yeah.
If they're not messing with you, then they probably don't like you.
Something's up.
Something's wrong. Yeah, that's right.
Well, this episode is one that actually I've been anticipating, bracing for, studying for. I think our listeners are in for an experience. How about you, Jordan?
Yeah, and I think we're probably still underprepared. So
I distinctly get that feeling. Right? Yeah. So Wood, we've your name has come up since we first purchased microphones. So the fact that you're here, very, very grateful that you've made the time. I know you're a busy individual. The topic we're going to talk about today, I guarantee you, is going to captivate our audience in particular, both on the military and civilian side. We're going to get to both sides of that. I don't know what the timeline's going to be on this episode. Probably one that people are going to have to break up in a couple of listening sessions, wouldn't you say?
I mean, maybe. We'll see.
That was like, hey, they can't see your nod. This is radio, bro. Right? So just so people may not be familiar with you that are outside of a particular radius, so maybe just spin us up on kind of top level career, where you sit now, and then we'll jump into our topic.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, y'all are. I don't deserve any of the accolades that y'all are.
Well, that's okay. Nobody does that's in the studio. But, it's just part of what we do.
I'm just a dude doing a job. Anyway, I've been in for about 23 years so far. Actually, I was in the Marines first. I grew up on a farm out in the middle of nowhere in Mississippi. I don't really know why I joined the Marines. Nobody in my family was in the military. I knew they would pay for college and shit, but it was just, I don't know, it was kind of a spur of the moment thing. And so I joined in June of 2001. And I remember because it was right out of high school when I was 18. And right after I signed, because I had to wait till I was 18 because my mom wasn't going to do it for me. And so right after I did it, I told my mom and my dad. And, my mom was crying and she was just like, I don't want you to go to war. I'm like, Mom, what are you talking about? There's nothing going on right now. And this was June of 2001. So very quickly, stuff started going on.
Didn't age well at all.
Not at all.
I feel so bad for that poor lady. Anyway, and so I ended up coming into I was originally in the infantry in the Marine Corps as an 0311. Then I ended up going to a thing called, it's out in Virginia, but it was the FAST company, which is the Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Team, which it seemed kind of cheesy at the time, but man, they really worked me up with close quarters battle and urban combat. That was a lot of what they did, and
that's quite a shift from the way you grew up.
And
right?
Exactly. I grew up out on a farm out in the woods. I was good out in the woods. I grew up hunting and everything. So the city was like a whole new thing for me, and they really made me comfortable there. So I was really happy with my time there. After that was for a few years, and we deployed a few times. Then after that, I ended up going back to the fleet. And I went to 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines in order to become a scout sniper. Ended up becoming a scout sniper there, which was awesome.
So what attracted you to if I could interrupt, being a sniper?
Oh, man, I don't know. Again, so it's weird. It's like when I originally joined the Marines, I was just like, and I wanted to be in the infantry, but I didn't know if I could be in the infantry. I didn't know if I was ever going to make it. And I went to boot camp and ended up going to SOI, or School of Infantry, and ended up doing actually pretty well there. And it was almost like a lot of what is, and this may happen throughout my life, but a lot of it was, I don't know if I am good enough to do it because the dudes there are so good. And I'd just be like, well, I'm going to give it a try. And eventually I did well.
That's sort of, this comes up a lot as we have these conversations, that sort of desire to reach for more, but that humility, it seems like an important part of the cocktail before you even try those things.
I think it is. I definitely think it is. And ambition can definitely be a double-edged sword. I will tell you that. But either way, as far as being a sniper, like I really wanted to be, I didn't really, they didn't have MARSOC at that time. So you either went recon or force recon or scout sniper. And I didn't, if you do recon and force recon, and people listen to this podcast that are in those communities, like, don't hate me for saying this, but like, you do your RNS mission, but you are a sniper, but you can be a sniper if you go to the school. But truly to be like live, eat, breathe sniping, you really have to be a scout sniper in the infantry, because that is your sole purpose for being. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. And it was good. And eventually my did a few deployments there, and then my contract ended. And by that point, this is around late 2005, early 2006, and I'd kind of like lost my taste for the military and war. I'm not like a militaristic person at all, and eventually somehow when I was on terminal leave, somehow met Jeff Dawson, and Jeff was. He tried to get me to come over to Special Forces, and he was basically set up a meeting, and I was like, well, I'm not going to go, but I'll just go I'm not going to go into Special Forces, but I'll just go to this meeting. And when I was sitting down with Jeff, I was basically interrupted him, and I was like, look, dude, like, man, I'm just here to fight. I'm not going to stand a parade rest for you. I'm not going to get, I'm not just going to go get my hair cut all the time. I'm like, I don't give a shit about all that. I would just like to fight. And I thought he was going to kick me out of his office. And he sort of looked at me, and he was just like, man, you're perfect for this.
Yeah,
and then
unknowingly saying the exact right things.
And so I remember he looked at me, he was like, man, I hadn't seen my hat in like 2 years.
That's it, yeah.
You accidentally passed the interview.
Right. And so then I got brought into, ended up doing well, went to the Q course, did well. Got on 2232, which has been my ODA. I've been blessed. I've been on the same ODA for, my entire career. How
would you say the combination of growing up rural and then becoming trained in close quarter combat, getting familiar with city, did that help? Because we have a lot of guys like 18 X-rays that are listening to this. Like, that combination help you get through the process, selection, and the course?
I think, I think it did. Obviously, like, so selection and the Q course are going to be predominantly sort of like, selection is going to be all pretty much out in the woods. A lot of that is going to be the STAR course. And so you really have to be comfortable really just being by yourself out in the woods in the dark. There's those that can do it, and then there's those that like thrive in it. And I remember, this is going to sound weird. I used to love, and I still do, like, one of my favorite things to do, and it's probably like a form of meditation for me, is to just go out in the woods in the dark by myself. No lights. I hate lights. I don't know. It felt good. A lot of guys, I think, whenever they do these really hard land navigation courses, I think some of them, for whatever reason, they can't take being by themselves in the dark. I know that sounds weird, but I feel like I saw that a lot. Yeah. So I do think that helped prepare me. As far as close quarters combat and the Q course itself, I do think it obviously helped, because we did a lot of, like, gun truck work. We did a lot of stuff like that. Everybody, obviously cross-training machine guns, everybody did whatever. So I was fairly well good at doing all the weapon stuff and tactical stuff. And I knew how to blend my urban tactics into my rural tactics, which is kind of an art in of itself, because, when you hit a house, you can quickly go from rural to urban quite a bit. So I do think it helped me there. But, that the urban combat portion of SUT, at least when I went through, this is 20 years ago. It was fairly small. A lot of it SUT is just like straight 7-8. So I think that growing up on a farm basically did help me.
Yeah. The reason I asked the question is because mostly what we're here to talk about today is mindset. And as we're getting this interview rolling, there's a lot of that being exposed even initially, in that mindset, no matter where you grow up or what your previous military experience is. And Jordan and you and I have sat around at SFREs and talked about this a lot, related to age, actually. You know, when the mindset kicks in, what makes a guy quit and what makes a guy stay? Like, how does that work out? So much of it is literally between the man's ears, right?
Well, I think that's when we were talking about land nav just a second ago. It's not the task of land nav necessarily. There's a lot of self-assessment happening. Are you okay with your own thoughts? And it's not the physical being alone. It's inside your mind alone. Absolutely. And can you stay on task and not let those, or do you even have voices or whatever it is that haunts you? Does that stuff gets exposed when you're alone in the dark, traveling?
Yeah. A lot of it is like, am I going in the right? Am I really on the right aspect?
Yeah.
Did I go too far? Did I do whatever? And so a lot of that emotional response will end up destroying your confidence. And that's actually one of the things that we kind of talk about later.
Well, for me, it leads into the mindset. I think if you're looking at the civilian point of view, which is 100% where I come from, the mindset is actually the most fascinating thing about special forces to me, because you have guys that can go, roll around in the sand, and people are paying tens of thousands of dollars to, hey, look, I can go through this and I can go through that. But the mindset, the sustained mindset for me is what's so fascinating, and where it helps and actually where it hurts. I know we're going to get to that a little bit later in this interview, but I think it would be helpful at this point just to start with discussing warfare and what that does to a mindset, what's required in order to go towards that, to go towards danger and to operate efficiently in that. I think a large part of the misconception from the civilian population as well is just muscle memory. It's just reps. I mean, it's trained into you, but we see that that's not true, because if it were, then everybody could be a Green Beret. Obviously, everyone is not a Green Beret. So talking through when we drop into what it breaks down to is, I would like to stay alive, so I'm fighting you. You would like to stay alive, so you're fighting me. Let's dig into that a little bit, because I think it would be fascinating discussion there.
Yeah, and I mean, so in this sort of like, and so I'm pretty obsessive with details, and also read a lot of philosophy, so you're gonna have to forgive me for how this episode is gonna go. But I do, and there's this argument about nature versus nurture, about what makes somebody like that, and like all arguments with nature versus nurture, I don't think one wins out over the other. I really think it's a combination of the two. Your life is a system of punishments and rewards, and a lot of it is how you can perceive that actual punishment reward. I mean, if you perceive a punishment, this is going to sound strange, if you can morph a punishment into a reward type feeling, I think that can help you. Now, the trick is figuring out how to do that.
Jordan, is this what you guys are talking about when you say eat pain? We just eat pain?
I think so. I think it's
very similar, yeah.
Yeah.
When for scout snipers, we used to have this thing in our schoolhouse. They would always say, suffer patiently and patiently suffer. And the reason why we would do that is because, our job was to basically remain unhidden and take these precision shots and remain unhidden after the shot is over as well. In order to do that, you really have to you're in the worst possible conditions. You're in the worst possible terrain. You're just basically eating shit. The thing is like, and we'll get into this later, is like, you're not just surviving, you're thriving. And that takes a mental shift for a lot of people. But anyway, and again, this kind of goes about me growing up. I mean, I was like the kid that I was a really nice kid. I was like the kid that butterflies and shit landed on. I don't know. It was very strange. I mean, I was really popular in high school. I, had a lot of friends. I never, ever, ever considered that I could ever kill anybody. I mean, it was repulsive in my mind. And so, again, I don't know why I joined the Marines. And
yeah, your whole glide path just makes a whole lot of sense, man. Yeah. Nice kid, could never kill anybody.
It's really weird, though, that you say that, man, because you kind of described me. Yeah. And I've talked to several guys that are the same way. They're like, man, I was a really good kid.
Yeah.
My parents didn't have to get on to me a whole lot. Like it's the weird, it's weird. It's strange that this many guys with very similar stories all find themselves in this line of work.
Yeah. Meaning Green Beret.
Yes.
Yes.
And so, I usually like to start as so how did I make that shift? And, I'm pretty introspective, or at least I try to be. So one of the things is it's starting from the very basics. And what I've come to realize is so warfare is warfare. Warfare has pretty much been the same as it was 1,000 years ago or more. Now, it has evolved, and most of that evolution comes from our trying to solve problems without flanking our enemy. And so we use, it started with, projectile weapons, then cavalry. And now we have, missiles, drones, things like that. But no matter what, at the end of all that, warfare always involves that infantryman on the ground. And so that was where that mindset of that infantryman on the ground, I became not obsessed with, but it was just more how I morphed. And so, and this took me a while, because when I first went in the Marines, I didn't have a good understanding. I mean, I was just learning. And in the Marines, I don't know if y'all know this, in boot camp, you say I don't say they force you, but you say kill 100 times a day. You say you attack the chow hall. You every time you do is kill them all. And people say it's brainwashing, and probably it is. To a point, but it's really more like a mantra, like a prayer, really. And it just allows you to put that in your mind, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I don't really think I understood human conflict. It's kind of a fast forward. I don't really, weirdly enough, until I was, I was already 6-7 years in, and I ended up going to college, and I took this course on just simple ecology. This is ecology. And ecology is just the study of how power moves from thing to thing in nature, basically, with predators, prey, sunlight, everything. And so one of the tenets of ecology is, and there's probably some biologists out there that are going to crucify me for messing this up, but it's been a while since I've been in college. But basically, two different species competing for the same finite resources in a biosphere region are eventually going to come into conflict. And I think, and that's just a very non-emotional way of looking at nature. And so if you kind of put that on our scale, there's a finite amount of resources. You can pick your resource. We can start with petroleum or something like that. There's a finite amount of petroleum. We know that it runs a good bit of our country or our economy, and there's a finite resource. Eventually, we're going to come into conflict with somebody else who wants that resource, because what we're trying to do is continue our genetic line. For the most part, you want your kids to be happy. With that being said, and it's in your particular region, I think where humans are, it's because we're obviously social creatures. We evolved into tribes, and we evolved into city states, and then we evolved into essentially countries and nations. And so you can sort of take that quote unquote species part and say it's when one nation and another nation are competing for the same finite amount of resources, they're probably going to come into conflict. And that's just that's ecology. And that's okay. But I think the big takeaway is that we're always going to have an armed conflict as long as there's finite resources.
I want to pause there for just a second, because this idea does fascinate me as well. Finite resources, I think, are often the underpinning, not necessarily mentioned by governments for reasons for going to war. Yeah. There's usually some larger, more honorable cause than we need more fuel.
Well, and I think that's I'm an idealist, but I think that, okay, so let's talk about the Iraq conflict. A lot of people said the Iraq conflict was about oil. Now, do I personally think it was just about oil? Not necessarily. This is also post 9/11. Americans were calling for blood from somewhere. We had quote unquote intelligence that was talking about Al Qaeda being in Iraq and all that stuff. And Saddam Hussein, was not a good guy.
Not a good man. Yes.
And there's people that say, well, it was all over oil. Now, what if it was? So what if it was? So is the oil going to, so again, we're competing with, I don't want to say an enemy economy, but like another economy. So either we're competing with China or Russia. If they have that oil reserve, that is going to help their economy out while probably hurting ours. Because again, this is saying, I'm not talking about fracking or anything like that. This is still a finite resource.
Yeah.
And so if we went there to get that oil to help out America's economy, now the people may look at that like it's a very bad thing or that's not honorable. But in the end, speaking pragmatically, is it the right thing to do? And that's what, and you can start to go into right or wrong, but I think when you're a leader, a lot of what you have to do is make non-emotional assessments about what you have to do to help out who you're leading.
Trying to do the greatest good for the greatest amount of people.
Absolutely.
Whether it's understood or not.
Whether it's understood or not. And and so that's a whole nother, aside, but I mean, I think that's a big thing. And so once you can kind of because the world is not a nice place. And so once you can sort of wrap your mind around that, I think it does help, because like knowing that there's going to be conflict, I think the next step is like realizing what a government is. And a government, so essentially, back when we were starting to sort of form in societies and things like that, a lot of the reasons why we formed into these societal structures was to defend ourselves against either wild animals or opposing tribes or whatever. And so in order to do that, you had these big group of people, and with those big groups of people, you had to have the several things. One, it's like you needed a leader to basically delegate how this work was going to be done. It's like, because you were working for the whole. So you had people that were purely doing pure military combat type stuff. You had farmers, you had whatever, but they would delegate all these resources to how they should be spent. The next thing is like you probably had to have laws which sort of govern how the society was going to be run. And so the thing about these laws, and even today, is like these were just simply ideas. Like these are holograms in our head. But like when I was a kid, you break the law. It's like an actual wall that's in front of you to keep you from doing something. But in reality, it's not. And I know that sounds very strange, but I think that's an aspect that helps us in combat, and I'll get into it later.
Well, this is a part of you guys and your world experience, though, that gets a little bit lost on the American. As I always say, in line at Chick-fil-A, it's like, well, wait a minute, the world isn't a nice place, but it should be,
right.
And then we have our government huddled together in one location talking about how we can make the world a nicer place, but then there's the knowledge of the reality that the world isn't a nice place. And I see the more that I interact with this population, this is a foundational understanding that you guys have. The world is not a nice place. Nobody's coming to save you. So there's a little bit of a top cover, and Jordan, you and I discussed with all of our windshield time, this can create a lot of cognitive dissonance here, that everyone around me kind of believes the world is nice and getting nicer. We know different.
Yeah, we call it first world problems.
Yeah.
And that becomes really frustrating once your blinders are off and you see more, your peripheral vision is opened up to the rest of the world. It makes the small things of day in and day out here in America you truly believe they are small things, because nobody's dying. Nobody's dying because somebody made your coffee wrong. It's not really a big deal, so just drink the coffee.
Right. Yeah. But I think this is a great place to insert into the conversation. So if this is true as a premise, then violence is, what is the word you apply to that? Necessary?
I think, man.
Here we go.
So when you were growing up and you got into like a altercation with somebody would always say violence is never the answer. That is a somewhat naive thing to say. And I really hate to use the word privileged, but it's like, they have the ability to say that because they're not dealing with what Jordan was just talking about. So violence is an answer to problems. The thing is it's a controlled application of violence that is usually controlled by leaders of that community that's it, because violence is an answer. Police officers carry guns. Police officers carry guns because they're enforcing the law. Again, ideological hologram that we have in our mind, but they're enforcing the law with threat of violence. Because if you don't do it, if you do kill the guy that made your coffee wrong or something like that, like they're going to come and they're going to hunt you down and throw you in jail. And there's a threat of violence against you, and that's what's keeping you in line. If you look at hundreds of years ago, they did public executions for a reason. That was a violent. You could get into the emotional versus non-emotional thing, and like, are they just simply removing people from society in a non-emotional way? But when you look at when they used to actually do pretty severe punishments on people in public, they were doing it to try to show the rest of the population this is what happens when you mess up. Thankfully, we don't really do that anymore. But to say that violence is never the answer, I think, is a naivety that that we all quickly, I don't want to say get over, but it's just more like you understand that violence has a place. It has a place in the natural world. Carnivores can't eat without killing another animal. Period. And that's a violent act. So it's one of those things where we say this is good or this is bad. I don't think it really falls in that realm, because that's going to be all relative. And we can and we'll kind of talk about that later too. But I think knowing what the government is and knowing what society is and knowing that we're going to be in conflict. So the governments did one thing. It's like they basically had people in these societies. They had people whose sole job was just to fight, and this is the military. And essentially, if you look at what the military is, it's all it is a political arm there to impose the will of your government on another country. And it does this by, like we talked about, willful acts of violence. And so if you're just going to break this down, the military and its logistical support structure is purely there to kill people and break things. That's its job. You can say that, they go on humanitarian missions and all this other stuff, but the point of the military is to impose political will via violence. And I think that some people, it's kind of hard for them to get that through their head.
Well, even me sitting here, knowing what I know about this population, there seems to be a separation, though, in the mind of a Green Beret, in that there is a humanitarian aspect to what you guys do, moving in to be an aid to life. Now, that does include doing bad things to bad people,
sure.
But there's kind of two worlds going on inside the Green Beret, it seems.
I think so, yeah, and that's absolutely true. And I don't want to sound heartless when I say this. A lot of that is because we're there to complete our mission, and that's our mission. Our mission is to overcome our enemy. If that means that we're going to go build a well in another country to help them drink water, and then then they're going to start giving us intelligence, then they're going to tell us where all the bad guys are, and then we go to action it, and then they're going to be on our side. Then it's not like we don't enjoy helping those people. It's just more like we don't have to do that. Our point is to go and complete the mission, to still destroy our enemy. And we don't, and the thing about Green Berets and especially special operations, they don't do it by just direct conflict or kinetic operations. They do it through everything. And so everything that we do, make no mistake, everything we do is there to eventually destroy our enemy. And it should be. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way it should be. The government's going to tell you that even in our Bill of Rights, like we have they say we have the right to live, to go to school, to all these things. And a lot of other government constitutions say the same thing. The thing is again, that is an idea, and that's an idea in each of our head. That can be taken away. Our government designates us to go kill people who have those same rights under their government. If that does that. Do I need to repeat that? You know what I mean? Their rights rights are just an idea that we have. And so, and that is it's kind of hard to hear sometimes, but don't forget it. The military is a very politically incorrect thing by nature. So it's difficult to talk about that aspect of stuff, but that is a reality. This is a pragmatic reality of what our purpose is.
Part of why it's so difficult, I think, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are bracing the things that they're hearing, but we're okay with that because we're talking about this idea from what we would hope is as truthful a perspective as we can gain. I think it also explains why things like 9/11, Pearl Harbor, there's a very predictable thing that occurs when violence gets closer. But for generations, apparently now, we have lived with the violence being very far away. So I think that's part of why a podcast like this is so very important, because it gives us a little bit of the verbiage and language for those in our society that have gone to where the violence is, where very bad things are happening. So, we can wax poetic about philosophy or all sorts of ideals or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But when you have someone on your front porch with a gun, then everybody's scale changes somewhat. You guys have lived an extended period of your adult lives face to face with that level of violence, and also viewing a lot of violence via drone footage with things that people do when they think no one is watching. So this changes the perspective of a person, and it's worth listening to because it can impact, and this is a big word we've kind of been dancing around since we turned the mics on, it impacts our emotions of a thing.
Exactly.
Emotions are a huge driver to what we do or what we don't do. And the level of information we have impacts our emotions. Part of what you guys say pretty frequently, though, is that not that you have to become unemotional, but you have to be in control of your emotions in very chaotic situations.
So what I just said, if you had told that to 17-year-old me, I would have felt repulsed, saying that we can just kill another person. But that is, that's a reality of the world, and it is a repulsive thing. But again, that is a reality of the world. The next thing is pretty much, okay, if you're going to say, okay, the military's there to kill people, this is always going to happen. So the next step is so how do you get to the point where you can actually kill somebody else? And that's basically accepting that you're going to have to kill somebody to complete your objective. Hopefully not, but most of the time, the military is there to kill people and break things. You're either going to threaten to kill them or you're going to kill them. With this being said, and I do think it, and as you said, so it's important. It's very important to separate yourself from your emotions during warfare. The thing about warfare is, and I think a lot of this is how you approach it. So I used to read a lot of old Greek philosophy, and it was almost kind of it was a contest, the way that they would approach each other, and they would approach warfare in general. They didn't necessarily hate each other. It was more of a contest, it was one fighter against the other. And it was a respectful thing, and that's what we say, it was an honorable competition. And that's kind of the way I've always sort of approached it, and I do think that that's helped me out, because it is an honorable competition. And honestly, it's one of the reasons why you have guys, it's they go to war and they struggle coming home, is war is this extremely brutally honest place. Now, your enemy is doing everything they can, including deception, to try to kill you. But they're honest about it. Everything is, you know that it's there. And you're going to do everything you can to deceive them, to do whatever you can to try to kill them. And it's this unbelievable, brutal honesty. And with that said, it was your teammates, you start to treat each other differently. You do become brothers. And, it's weird because it's that when you go out on patrol, this may be the last time that you see each other. And so when you tell one of your teammates, you're hey man, love you, you mean it. It's not you're not veiled in some criticism about what that means or whatever. You're just hey, you're my brother, I love you, come back. And there's this honesty that happens in combat that is extremely difficult to get over when you come back to, and I'm just going to say America, and I'm sure this is pretty much any other, other countries likely go through the same thing, because you come back and people here lay traps for each other. They disrespect each other. They don't, whatever. Warfare is this incredibly respectful place. And you learn to respect life and respect things. And then you come back and you feel like it's not there, and you want it to be because you made so many sacrifices and so many people die and so many because you want it to be this idealistic place, and it's not, and that really messes a lot of people up.
I think it's one of the purest ways to live, at least for me. Like you cherish every day. You don't take things for granted. You don't take each other for granted. You tell the truth when you can up front, you know, just because of everything you just talked about, Wood, that it may be the last time. You may not get to do this again. You may not. So when you say I love you, you truly mean it. It's not taken for granted. You know, water isn't taken for granted because the water, you had to do work to get the water. It's really hard to replicate that, at least in my experience here at home. And 'cause even with the people you love, you live with them every day, you start taking them for granted. You don't do that when you don't know that I mean, obviously we today may be our last day here. Right. We just don't treat it as such. Absolutely. Like you do there.
Scott Mann, a couple of episodes ago, talked about this very thing, just the difference in culture and what happens when you're in combat and how that forges relationships. And, you know, I think the unfortunate side of that is that you guys are a very small slice of the population. So you operate between these two cultures, one of which is very honor, shame based, as Scott Mann put it. And then you step into the civilian population, and my proposal is the deeper we go into the human experiment, honor is receding.
Yeah.
You know, so it puts you guys in a very precarious situation, which I think would lead to certainly a lot of conversations, especially if the mics were turned off.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because you're like, okay, we keep using this word honor, but I mean, like, what is that? It's so many things, and that's I guess again, I obsess with basics about what, but like, I mean, honor is an extremely difficult thing to describe. Before getting into that, you know, you talked about separating yourself emotionally and stuff like that. I do want to say that there's a difference between, like, so, okay, emotions to me are the enemy of logic. Emotional thinking is the enemy of reasoning. And you have to be calm and collective in combat, and you have to make logical decisions. Like, this is, I mean, it's very scientific. That being said, you don't need to lose your humanity, and it's very easy to do that. So ethics should still play a part in most everything you do. At least you try to. I mean, honestly, if we're going to look at, if we were really going to defeat our enemy, I mean, why wouldn't we just nuke them? Why wouldn't we just do whatever? Why wouldn't we just go over there and just kill everybody? But I mean, that's not an ethical thing to do. We're just trying to destroy the actual enemies. We're trying to do certain things. I don't know. I think ethics is a difficult portion to play in it. And it's good because you do have, like, the Geneva Conventions. You have these things that try to, and again, they're trying to do the impossible. They're trying to make something politically incorrect correct. They're trying to make something, you know, universally, I don't want to say right. It's just more of it's just a very, I don't know how else to say it. It's just an extremely difficult thing to do. And I think that every individual is going to struggle with it, and especially when they go through a big combat firefight or whatever, and they're all of a sudden flooded with all these emotions. Or when they see their friends get killed, and they're flooded with all these emotions. They have to learn how to suppress that as good as they can.
So based on the way the Green Berets operate, this part of the discussion I think would be great to capture, in that you've got a team of people, a group of people that love each other, know each other, have been through a lot together. They're not all going to be at the same place at the same time when it comes to emotions, because these are people. They've got life going on outside of military career, even on deployment. In the AAR, though, you're almost you're going about it logically, right? But if you step away from it, then all violence seems unethical, not necessary. So this is a big mix, and we see it happen a lot. Like, what did this team do? What did these guys do? And often the language that you hear back is, well, it would be impossible for me to actually convey to you what it was like because you weren't there.
Yeah.
Often, though, that's been used as a justification for some really off-the-wall stuff. But I think the thing that we're discussing here today is the emotion and the mindset. I mean, how do you actually maintain humanity? You've got to depend on the dynamics of the ODA, I'm assuming, because the way that you guys operate, deep behind enemy lines, isolated, you have to depend on the chemistry or the dynamic of the ODA to make sure that humanity is maintained.
Well, and again, this sort of goes into this, like, so what are we doing? Like, I am killing another person so, like, my kids can live. That's the basics of what I'm doing. Even if I don't have any kids, I'm killing another person so my friends' kids can live. So, I mean, that is the brutal honesty of what we're doing. That's okay, because when you talk about what's right and wrong, and I always use this example, some of my friends that actually, if they ever listen to this, they're going to laugh at me. So right and wrong is like a relative thing. And I always came up with this thing in my head. It's like a lion versus a gazelle. So a lion wants to go and inflict violence upon this gazelle. It wants to eat the gazelle. And it has to eat the gazelle because it wants to feed its kids. It wants to continue its genetic line. That's how it survives. So that particular scenario, so the gazelle doesn't want the lion to eat him. He's going to do everything he can to get away, do whatever. Because if the lion eats the gazelle, then the gazelle's kids are likely not going to survive. His genetic line is not going to continue. So which one is right and which one is wrong? This is relative to the individual. I mean, and that's okay. Like, again, this leads into like what is right and what is wrong. And I think that honor does have something to do with it. And so getting into at least how I look at it as far as honor goes, like, it's really funny because before this, I try to define things, and like, the way that honor is defined by the Army is it says basically fulfilling your values of respect, duty, integrity, loyalty, selfless service, and personal courage. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but that just sounds like a typical line that you would read in like an Army manual. And so, I mean, and it's whatever. And there's different definitions to different people. Basically, to me, honor is basically staying true to your ideals of what is right, despite what is happening around you. But this is like, so what is right and what is wrong? I mean, how do we decide? And so I do think that you have an underlying moral kind of right versus wrong, and they can act as sort of moral compass. I do think that can get degraded, and you do see that, especially in places where you've seen terrible war atrocities. Because you have to look, your enemy it's not like your enemy just became like an asshole overnight or something like that. It's not like Hitler became an asshole overnight. Or, whatever. A lot of these they evolved into. Either way, so it's not like they didn't have a moral compass. I just think that, again, the system of punishment rewards, for whatever reason, they got morphed into this where they became, in the end, this horrible creature. But I do personally, like, the way that I always say is, like, when you kill somebody, be very respectful. It's like, so I always looked at, like, I think that hating your enemy is wrong. One, that's an emotional response, and you shouldn't have that. But, like, I've known people that hated the enemy, and they degraded them or they treated them as inhuman. And I think for a number of reasons that's a mistake. And one of the main reasons I think that's a mistake is because whenever you treat your enemy as not a human, you underestimate them. Like, these people that you're killing, they have mothers, they have, fathers, they have probably sons and daughters. These are all people that love them. That doesn't mean you're not going to kill them. But I mean, if you look at them like they're just this subhuman thing, I don't think that you understand their capabilities. And if you don't understand their capabilities, then you are underestimating them, and that is to your detriment later on. I do think that, again, if you kill this person, just do it honorably, do it respectfully, or be respectful about it. Now, I mean, you're going to say, how do you respect somebody and then still kill them at the same time?
Honest question.
And I think that is, again, it goes back to how you approach the combat in the first place. I mean, this is it's similar to like a football game. Like, I'm going to fight against the other team as much as I can. And I may like hate them for like a little moment or whatever like that. And it's an emotional response that they're forcing out of me. But in the end, this is still a competition. It's an honorable competition because they are stepping on the battlefield with you. And the thing is like, honestly, coming home, there's a lot of people, at least I felt this way. Like, I felt like I had more in common with the people that I was killing than I did back home, because even though their values were different from mine, they still had the courage to stand up and fight for what they thought was right. Now, again, different values, whatever. And they thought that so much that they were going to take up arms. And so then you get to meet them on this this glorious field of combat. And whoever wins, wins. It's not a bad thing. This is an honorable thing. It's just you have to put it in your mind that it is an honorable thing, because you can quickly degrade it. And warfare can quickly degrade into stuff that is extremely repulsive.
How do you explain this at the soccer field? Right? I mean, what does this conversation go like?
I mean, I have this kind of conversation with my kids. Like, I got kids playing soccer, football, baseball, and there's an honorable way to win, and we would all agree with that. There's an honorable way to lose, whether you're throwing helmets and throwing bats and kicking things around and cussing and the way you're acting. We would all probably, in this room at least, agree that that's a dishonorable way to act on the field just because you lost, or because you won. The way you treat them after you beat them, that's how I just discuss it with kids. We don't go into warfare and what that looks like, not age appropriate, right?
Right.
But I think through a lot of it that Wood was just talking about, there's this deeper layer that, and he mentioned it briefly, of moral compass. There's this, your morals, whatever it is, these values that you hold deeper, your emotions are going to rise up and you're going to want to act a certain way. But when you start feeling it pull you away from that, you have this backbone to go to that is this foundation that you can always go back to, that holds you accountable. And if you can't find your way there, the beautiful thing about an ODA is you got a bunch of honest men around you that can immediately be, hey, I get it. Like, I feel how you feel, but there's a way to go about this and a way not to go about this. So how do you want to look back on this in your memories? How do you want to live out the rest of your lives and look back on this moment in time and pull each other back in? And so again, it goes back to brotherhood. It's not just the training and all that. There is an emotional side to that as well. Like, it's real.
This requires, from my point of view, an incredible amount of discipline. And that's one of those words that just sticks to the SF culture is discipline, right? So can we talk about that for just a minute? Because I think this is also a word that is getting bastardized and falls on deaf ears in current culture. What does discipline mean to the Green Beret?
Discipline is doing the right thing, essentially. Like, for instance, disciplining yourself to stay in shape, disciplining yourself to do all of your tasks and be the best you can possibly be at those tasks, and then having the integrity. I think integrity and discipline go kind of hand in hand, that you're maintaining whatever it is on your own. So if I can't trust you to have this much weight in your rucksack and you can't be disciplined enough to carry that load, how can I trust you with anything more? How can I trust that your discipline level is there? Like, I don't have time to discipline you to make you do it. You have to have this internal discipline. Does that, hopefully I stayed on kind of the right track there, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think, it's interesting because, again, it's like kind of like the definition of honor. It's like, so what is discipline? I remember when I was in the Marines, like a young devil dog, they were talking about discipline, and somebody said, discipline is doing the right thing even when no one's looking. And for whatever reason, that definition always bothered me, mainly from the fact that it's like it's almost like you're doing the right thing because somebody else is watching you. You're doing the right thing for somebody else. And so I agree with sort of it. I think that, to me, discipline is like doing what you feel is the right thing, even when you don't want to do that. And it's kind of a simple definition, but it's like, I think it is pretty powerful. And so, I mean, early on, and you probably ran into this, is like, what you would see what separated the good soldiers from like the average soldiers, or good Marines from average Marines, is like when they were put in these incredibly difficult scenarios and how they chose to perform. A big one that I always kind of used was, after you're going from a long patrol, like this is like for SUT or Ranger School or something, but after you're going from a long patrol, it's like you go into your priorities at work. Most people, they're tired, they're worn out, and so immediately the one thing they want to do is go to sleep. but you need to set in your perimeter. You need to clean your weapon. You need to do all these things. You need to get set up for when you're going to get attacked and when you're going to get blown up. Because the whole purpose for all these party works is to get set up for when you're going to get attacked, when you're going to get blown out. And you're setting in your defense. While most people just want to go to sleep. And you'd be surprised at how difficult it is these are special operations soldiers that are doing this too. They find that they don't do the right priorities of work. I think for indoctrination things like SFAS, I know for Scout Sniper indoctrination, which was incredibly brutal when we went through and there was really no real rules. I probably shouldn't say that, but the thing is like you would bring people we always talk about bringing people to their breaking point. You would bring them to their breaking point, and there's certain things that are like, oh, we're going to bring them to the breaking point and see, and push them just enough to see how they act. The indoctrination was like they would bring you to a breaking point and then they would just push you in. You had people that were just mentally breaking down, crying or doing whatever. It really was one of the more brutal selection processes I ever went through. And each battalion, just as an aside, each battalion does their own thing. It's kind of weird. Or it's obviously changed now. But either way, like you saw how people acted once they reached that level. There's certain people that are just like, you're at the end of a 26-mile road march and you're like, okay, you thought you were at the end, but we still have 26 more miles. Certain people they break down. And then there's certain people that just put their head down and just keep going. Even though they know that they probably won't make it, they're still going to try. And it's just weird because it's like it's the right thing to keep going. I think that's an example. But to me, it's like, so when I think of discipline, it's like, so I think a true warrior should practice discipline pretty much in everything that they do. And that's, basically, and that it goes into training as well. They need to train when they're tired. They need to expose yourself to harsh conditions for long periods of time. Put yourself in scenarios you don't want to be in. Taking the time to perfect every single small step of the task or procedure that you're going to do. And then not only that, but self-critiquing yourself after that and trying to seek that self-improvement with each task. I think that is discipline. Not taking shortcuts when when quality is going to be when it's going to be detrimental to the quality. Now, I think it's okay to take shortcuts. I think it's okay to cheat. The thing is you just got to do it as long as it doesn't. It's not detrimental to the quality of how you're going to conduct the mission.
This is also a part of the culture that gets very confusing, just to shoot straight with both of you.
Yeah.
Skirting the gray seems to be, very applauded when it's to a particular end. Mm-hmm. But I've seen, even in my brief time around the community, a significant amount of arguments about skirting the gray. Mm-hmm. Like, was this appropriate? Was it not appropriate? Mm-hmm. So there's this middle ground, again, kind of being hung in this ideal, hung between two poles of what should have happened or what didn't happen, and who gets to make that call. And then we start talking about, chain of command. And so it layers and layers and layers. But part of this culture that is so fascinating is, yes, if we can find a better way or a faster way or a more effective way, even if it goes against, as you've referenced already, the manual, even if it goes against the manual, it will pass in the end because it's what should have happened or it's the way we determined that it should happen. This stuff gets really messy, gentlemen.
Yeah. But who gives a shit about the manual if you lose the war?
Yeah.
I think
it's at least goal-oriented. Yeah. So if you take a group of guys that are all goal-oriented, who cares how you get to that goal? How do you achieve it? I don't care. And that's why, that's built into the teams where you'll set up and come up with different courses of action and then put those together. And maybe we use yours or maybe we blend the two together to get the desired outcome.
I think, and this kind of goes with, if you look at most special operations and most selection processes, they're selecting individuals. They're selecting individuals that they can trust to do or at least they hope that they can trust to do the right thing in these very difficult situations. And that takes a lot of maturity. That takes a lot of what we talked, the mindset. Mm-hmm. When I was when I first started off in the Marines, they told me how to be. They told me what honor was. They told me, they made me say kill 30,000 times a day. They told me how to be. Because, when you're a young kid coming up, when you're like a young infantry, you don't know what the fuck you're doing. You don't know how to win a war. You don't know how to really maneuver. You could probably regurgitate 7- to a point, regurgitate 7-8 to them, or like how to set an ambush. You don't know what the fuck you're doing. You don't know how to be, because it's a learning process. You have to mature into it. You have to experience it. And again, then this goes into what you're saying. So, and that's I think where a lot of X-rays, and I honestly feel bad for them, because I've had some really, really great X-rays on the team, but I mean, the attrition rate for X-rays is incredibly high, or at least it was.
It still is.
Now. And it's because, I mean, you're trying, again, nobody gives a shit how far you can ruck. They're not, I mean, yeah, you have to be in shape to do it, but they're not like assessing you on that. They're assessing you on can I trust this dude to go down range with no oversight and still and make the right decision. And when I say make the right decision, like win the fucking war, like complete his objective. Because ultimately that's what it's all about. Now, I'm also sort of back when the wars were, it was still pretty pragmatic. Nowadays, obviously there's, J sets and things like that. And there's your left and right lateral limits have narrowed significantly as far as what you're allowed to do. But in the end, I mean, yeah, you're there to accomplish a mission. Now, if your mission is to go be diplomatic, but still try to assert influence, that's your mission. So, and it kind of goes about like what discipline is. And I remember even when I was, there's always been this clash between like conventional and special operations. And again, it's like you have to understand, like conventional is kind of like this big, this big team. Their job is to be this death-dealing super organism. They work as a team in order to kill people and break things. And so the uniforms, like the hair, they have uniformity. They have all these things because each person on that team has to do their job in order for the organism to survive. So they're not wrong in the uniformity that they want as far as uniform standards and haircuts and things like that. But again, a lot of that is made up of just younger guys. The younger guys, unfortunately, I mean, they need mentorship. We all needed mentorship when we were younger. Special operations, and they still have some mentorship in special operations. There's a reason why on an ODA you have a senior and a junior, and you still have your chain of command. And so the thing is like when you get into special operations, discipline is one of those things where, you'll see the conventional guys go like, oh, they don't have a haircut, they're undisciplined. And then I understand, you have to understand like where they're coming from, but that's not really the thing. The way that, this to me, so people that look best in clothing look best naked. People that can execute their job to perfection, they don't need a uniform standard to remind them to do that, hopefully. So if that's the case, like, we don't care whether we have haircuts or anything like that. We're just there to complete a mission. We're there to do our job and to do it the absolute best that we can. Now, where it's kind of gotten conflicted, and God, the whole war on terror shit, like we have beards and long beards. So that's our job was to go and, basically recruit and train foreign soldiers to fight for us or with us, through us. And so in order to, in that community, to get respect as a male, a lot of the times you needed a beard. And that was what it was. And then it sort of morphed into this thing like, oh, special ops has beards. And there was even a lot of special operations guys that had no idea why the fuck they had a beard. Like, because they would be asked why they had one, and they'd be like, it was to cover my face up. And you're like, no, that's not no, dude, your job is to go and to build rapport and to blend in. Now, that being said, these same special operations guys, if you're going to say go and train this conventional and whatever, because conventional is what it is, and conventional is fucking badass. And there's not much, that's another thing. Conventional is awesome. They will save your ass. There is nobody that you want to be in a dirty firefight other than being with them. And you can ask any guy who's been in like a blue on blue with like a conventional platoon, like they lay down walls of lead. Like they will fuck you up. Like a conventional company, like the amount of firepower that they can deliver is unbelievable. ODAs don't stand a chance if they were to go one-on-one against them. That's the reason why we sneak around. We blend in. And so, I mean,
try to do that.
I mean, but seriously, now, we say that we're more agile and we think quicker on our feet, and that's true, sure. We're not as slow just because we're a smaller organization. But then again, we also, like when I was in Afghanistan, we were leading companies in almost battalion-sized elements, in combat. It was still slow. It was basically, we were conventional to a point. That being said, conventional is awesome, man. They really, really are. And they deserve respect. And so you need to work with, they look at us like we're these incredible, Jedis, which I don't think we deserve. But it's weird because it's like when you get guys that have been through a lot and have good experience, it's funny, how much that they can actually train to improve your own nation, your own whatever. I used to do exercises where I was kind of obsessed with near peer stuff after Afghanistan, and where I was like, man, when was the last time we trained on killing tanks? When was the last time we trained on shooting down air and all this stuff? So I would just go to these conventional units, like a tank company, and be like, hey, they're about to deploy, and I was like, man, can I just ride along with y'all? Can I just hang out? And they were like, yeah, sure, whatever. And so I was just like, show me how y'all work. Show me how you look through your FLIR tubes. Show me how you burn, how you look for enemy. And then you're like, okay, how would you kill yourself the best? If you were an enemy, how would you kill yourself? And in return, I would train them on small unit tactics and stuff like that. And they would just look at it like it was this incredible thing. And you could tell what was morphed into the military mindset about how they would do stuff, because they would do stupid shit. Like when they were going to attack a bunker, they were using CQB tactics. I'm like, bro, pull your fucking Bradley up and just fucking fire that fucking chain gun into that bunker, exhaust your grenades, and then go in. You don't need to go in. I mean, it was funny. I mean, it's weird, but I mean, that's because they look at movies, they look at us, and they see the CQB thing, and you're like, bro, you don't realize how incredibly dangerous CQB is. Anyway, but that's anyway. But working with conventional, you need to become conventional. So if your job is to go and train conventional, and they wear a uniform and they have a haircut, then get a fucking haircut. I mean, period. If your job is to help them out, your job is to blend there and complete the mission. So if you're an SF guy who is supposed to go, be at the flagpole or go do whatever, get a fucking haircut. It's you're more than happy to blend in when you're in the Middle East, but you're not happy to blend in when it's your own dudes. And none of us being told what to do.
I want to make sure I'm hearing you right, though, because you're saying some pretty controversial things. You're just saying them, in a fluid manner.
Yeah.
But you're called the Special Forces. Mm-hmm. But the point that you're making is we're not that special, unless I'm hearing you wrong.
No.
The point you're making is we're not that special. That's a little bit confusing.
I mean, I've said this in classes that I've taught, and I've had it said to me in classes, and it made sense, is you're not really that special. Mm-hmm. You do the fundamentals really good. Mm-hmm. And as long as because the fundamentals work and they've been proven to work. So why don't you just do the fundamentals really, really good, better than everybody else? And then it's going to look special, even though you're doing the same thing they're doing. You just have had more time, more training. Mm-hmm. That's really it.
Special operations are tools in a toolbox, period. So I would say maybe we're more of I don't know. What separates us is our agility to move to certain areas, blend into whatever, and our ability to concentrate firepower. But make no mistake, the reason why we're doing that is you support a greater mission in one way or another. And a lot of the times that greater mission is conventional. So it's for Green Berets, we do unconventional warfare. We train dudes up. We go and do direct action. We do sabotage, subversion, whatever. The reason why we're doing it is we're prepping the battlefield for conventional to come, for the freaking sledgehammer to come. And that's the conventional. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my job because it's just incredible. But again, all we are is just infantry on steroids. I mean, you're doing basic.
Not literally.
Not literally, excuse me.
Or maybe.
Or figure of speech.
Yeah, but no, I mean, all you're doing is just doing you're executing the basics very, very well. And I think the thing is you're understanding, to me, that's the difference, is you're understanding the basics very well. I mean, so if you look at these incredible painters, a lot of the times they use the same brush strokes, same tiny brush strokes every single time. They just know how to apply it to make this just beautiful picture. And I think that's the thing that special operations at least try to do, is you do these basics very, very well. You execute the same way every time. You do it very well, non-emotionally, self-critiquing, improving yourself constantly. Because your job is to become this, where the battlefield is just your canvas and you're a painter. That's what you wish to become. But you don't forget the basics in doing so. It just looks like you do because you maybe did this incredible thing or whatever, but it all came from just executing basic level stuff very, very well.
I think part of that is sent through the filter, though. I don't want to get out over my skis here, but there's obviously in this culture an obsession with information. Let's get as much information as possible.
That's very accurate.
So we need to figure out what that is so that we can employ whatever tactics we need to. So that's one part of it. The other part that for me is striking is that I've yet to meet a Green Beret that wasn't extremely comfortable with his own death. Maybe to the point of like, I've already nearly experienced it. I don't know how to put words to it just because I'm a sheltered individual. But that seems to be a huge marker inside the population as well. Like I don't have to fight through that fear of dying because I've already kind of been there so much. That's one of those brushstrokes. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's this guy, and this is not like a new thing or anything. This was like Bushido basically had this, back when the samurai. And I mean, they had a quote and I actually wrote it down. I write, that's one of the things I do because I'm a fucking nerd. But I write what I think is necessary quotes to remind me every day because we still need reminding. One of those that I've always lived with is while you're sleeping, someone is training to kill you. That was one of my favorite ones. And the other one is rehearse your death every morning and every night. It's like only when you can live as though you're already dead that you can truly be free and you can execute and I'm paraphrasing here, but you can execute your job without fault.
It's very Marcus Aurelius of you.
So that was Bushido, but yeah, so good. Yeah, no, this is Stoic sort of philosophy. And I do think that like Stoic philosophy is probably one of the better things to that mindset is very, very similar. I mean, it's so basically you're humble, you're there with yourself. So it even goes back to what we're saying, special forces ain't special. Like you're comfortable with your death. Like you're going like, if I put my ODA up against an infantry squad, it would be a good fight. Now, to a point, as long as they had good leadership and stuff like that. But it could be a good fight. It's not like they're not going to execute, and not like they're going to do it. I mean, you're probably going to have casualties. There's a reason why we always want to do 3-on-1 or more. Special operations is a little different because we use different strategies to our advantage, like whatever. But I mean, the thing is like, and it kind of goes into the humility and to the assurance for your own death. But like, are you familiar with like the Cella Scouts?
No.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Man, God, there's some good history behind that. And it is going to be somewhat controversial. It's back in the 70s in Africa. But either way, so the Cella Scouts were part of Rhodesia. You know, Rhodesia, yeah. Basically, they were there. They called them counterterrorism force. And so them, along with the Rhodesian Light Infantry, became one of the most successful, quote-unquote, counterterrorism entities to ever live. They were incredibly good at what they did. The Cella Scouts' main job was to go and find people. Like they were a good target. If you were going to put it in modern day times, like they were good at targeting. Even though I don't know, I guess if you want to use quotes or buzzwords now, they were the integral part of the kill chain. I hate that freaking word. But they went. You can't. Like, yeah, U.S. is great at killing people. The U.S. military can go and just destroy pretty much any enemy they come against. But they're like, why were we in Afghanistan for 20 years? You're in Afghanistan for 20 years because it was hard to find these people. That was what the Cella Scouts were really good at. And the way they did that was they blended in a number of things. But either way, there was this very, very elite special operations unit. And there was this guy named Reed Daly who sort of started them up. And you can actually YouTube this video too. And it talks about their indoctrination process. It talks about their mindset and things like that. And he talks about why he doesn't like their unit organization being in the media is because like the media looks at, and this is special operations, they look at these special operations guys like they're supermen. And then all of a sudden these guys start to think of themselves as supermen and they do stupid shit. They don't they think that oh man, I can do that. And they don't use their fucking head. There's one thing to say I'm going to go do this very, very difficult mission, but I'm going to realize that there's a lot of things that are against me. Just because I'm there and I'm God's gift to warfare doesn't mean I'm going to do well. And you'd be surprised at how many, I'm not just talking about this is with Air Force, Navy, Marine, Army special operations across the board. And I've seen Green Berets that I remember when I was in Afghanistan, there was one team, and I'm not going to try to get too into details, but they were oh, we're just going to do a movement to contact in this very particularly bad area. And they were we're just going to go get in our gun trucks and do a movement to contact. And and they were do y'all guys want to come along? Because you can bring your commandos. And we were fuck no, bro. What do you mean? You're just going to go drive up to them? He's yeah. It's we're just going to go drive up, find some contact, and go do it. And I'm you're fucking retarded, man. You're going to get lit the fuck up. Because they were so sure of themselves as being just Green Berets that went through hard training that all of a sudden they're going to be just do well in war. And that's not the case. And guess what? They got fucked up. Just the way it is. You have to be smart and understanding, and you have to have a level of humility when you do these operations. You have to have a level of you have to be realistic with yourself about what your capabilities are, what your real capabilities are. And then you figure out what the enemy's centers of gravity are, where they are. It's kind of the old Carver matrix, where their weaknesses are, and then you just basically surgically exploit them, and then you leave, because once they find you and if they fix you, they're gonna fuck you up. You got to get out of there. But yeah, it was a big thing as far as having a distorted opinion of yourself or just overconfidence, and that can absolutely and I'm sure that there's guys that are probably listening to this podcast can think of examples about where that really got people really, really messed up.
So we're talking about some big words here today, which I'm very appreciative of, but honor, discipline, courage. One we haven't touched on yet I want to bring up is expectations, because I feel like you're hovering in that area right now. What are my expectations of how this is going to go, the expectations of what my training has produced in me? Expectations are a difficult thing to monitor, and I would say even especially today as warfare has changed. Over the course of GWAT, there has been a dramatic shift in the view of war, the expectations of war, the government's expectations of war, and this has caused some problems for the fighting man, correct?
And when you're saying expectations, you mean what are the expectations I'm setting for myself, or what? I would say both. The expectations I have of myself, of course, I could answer that very briefly. Extremely high for the Green Beret. I have high expectations for myself. That is a necessary component of becoming a Green Beret. I think where the trouble starts to ensue is when that same level of expectations is applied to other things, whether it be the government at large or other forces. So expectations are a huge part, I think, of what gets the Green Beret, if I could say, sideways, correct? I think so. I mean, I don't want to mistake how you're wording this, because it's if I was going to basically, again, so the military is a political arm, so some politician's going to say, I don't like that person, you need to go kill him, or you need to go be a diplomat, or do whatever. Or you could look at what we're going to have our infantry go and we're going to occupy this country and have our infantry act as a police force. Setting that's the expectation you're set. That has no, if that higher level leadership is going to put their soldiers in a situation to which they did not train and expect them to have a good outcome, I don't think that that's going to go well.
Not a good expectation.
You're going to train them from day one to kill people and break things, and then say hey buddy, we're about to send you over there, welcome to combat, but hold on, you got to be nice to people. You got to do this, and this. And it's difficult. I mean, because again, these are kids, man. They're worried about coming home, and they're worried about the dude next to them. So they're a lot of these kids are emotional. So you have to really, that as far as the expectations that are set forth on Green Berets, on whatever, it's difficult, because if they look at us like we're these supermen and stuff like that, or how we execute and get things done, the thing is that all that takes time. So it's working with the local populace, blending in with the local populace, getting them to trust you by doing humanitarian, whatever, building that trust, developing targets, actioning a target, which you're likely is not going to go well the first few times. You're probably going to hit a shit ton of dry holes. You're probably going to hit a shit ton of stuff, but then eventually you got to keep doing it and keep building your intelligence and keep actioning your intelligence, you know, that takes a lot of time. We go on like 6-7 month deployments, and to be quite honest, like, I'm not saying it's not enough, because again, this isn't World War III. We're still trying to come home to our families. It's just, you know, if this was World War III, realistically, we'd probably be over there for, it'd be like the OSS. We're going to be over there for like 2 or 3 years.
That's right.
I mean, realistically speaking.
Yeah. 6 months is like just touching the tip of the spear.
Yeah.
Where you're starting to get things figured out, and you know where people are and how things are going. And then you get pulled, another team comes in, and you try to do a great handoff with them and hope that they continue doing what you're doing. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. It just kind of depends on the team dynamic of what's coming in after you.
This leads to a great deal of frustration, though, right? I mean, I'm home from a deployment, and this is where, you know, my job comes in as part of HPW. I'm really frustrated because that deployment did not meet my expectations.
And I know we kind of touched on this with the outline, but yeah, I mean, so I think that is a huge thing with special operations in general too. Is like, so you go through all this training, you're all of a sudden this cool guy that gets to wear fucking sunglasses and stuff like that, and then you go on a deployment where you basically train some jundies and you're never allowed to leave the base. You go on a deployment where you're going to try to do what you think is this good mission, and it ends up falling short of what your expectations were. Frankly, a lot of the guys, they just want to go out and kill people, and they don't get to do it. And that really messes with the psyche of a lot of guys, and that really messes with the psyche of a lot of teams. And you'll see teams that, and you see, sister ODAs, not whatever, but like not anymore.
Not anymore.
I hadn't been on them in a while, so I'm not pointing fingers at this point. But it was like, you know, no mission was cool enough for them. So it was like, even, and the thing is and that bled down into training too, which was such a pain in the ass to watch. Like, this training scenario sucks. I'm not going to do it. And it's like, because my expectation is I'm this, like, I'm the tip of the spear. I need to be here, and here. It didn't mean shit, man. A lot, like, being, like, we had a really, like, so my best, I've had a few really good deployments, but I'd say, like, my favorite deployment was probably Africa, but my second favorite, or the one where honestly we killed the most people, was in Afghanistan. And it was frankly just right time, right place. And that's all combat is like, you're in the right time, right place. You have the right team, right time, right place. And so a lot of these guys are like, God sent me on a mission, whatever. And it's just, I mean, that's just how it falls. It's unfortunate. But I mean, I think once those guys get into where they're like, I'm too good for this, that's a huge poison to the team. And any leader of that team needs to try to nip that in the bud, like, right away. I will say this, it's like, you know, when I went through the Q course, I was very fortunate to, I trained under Jim Gant. I know he's a bit of a controversial subject in our community, but I loved him. And the thing was, it was like, because he was 100% like for the mission, 100%. And one of the things that he always used to harp on was like, you can't do well in combat, like, unless you can take training seriously. Or the people that do the best in combat scenarios do the best in training scenarios. Like, mentally putting yourself, when you're in that training scenario, that you're in combat, making those decisions. Because it's just like how we talked about rehearsing your death every morning and night. So by the time it gets there, you're not freaking out. You know, training realistically in combat, whether the training scenario fits or not, or whether it's what your expectations are or not, treating it as real as you can will only help you out. It will only help you when that actual combat scenario comes. But no, a lot of guys that don't have the career that they wanted, it ends up messing with them quite a bit. And even when you're on like those good. And the thing is like, those guys, even when they're on this really, really good deployment, or they're on this really, really good team or whatever, it's almost like they're never happy. It's almost like it gets snowballs into like, I don't know, they're never happy unless they're doing this particular mission set. When you're a Green Beret, like, your mission set is not just to go kick down doors. Your mission set is enormous. Your mission set is to be whatever it's supposed to be for that particular deployment. You have to adapt, and you have to complete that mission, whether it's what you want or not.
That's a tough thing to balance, though, isn't it? I mean, you're you're brought in because of your capabilities are so wide. The left to rights are so wide, and then at some point, it seems to happen. Maybe not to a large percentage, but to a certain percentage, that the shot pattern gets real tight. Like, I'm only happy in this particular scenario. And you want to talk about wrecking a career, as you mentioned, like everything gets very, very narrow. And when I sit down with HPW and I start talking to a guy and that emerges, I will say honestly, that is very hard to correct. It's really hard to talk a guy out of that because of the certain set of circumstances over a protracted period of time seem to have led to that. And there's always the ability for that Green Beret or that soldier to hide behind, if that's not a disrespectful term, the accumulation of experience. There's just no way to logically pull a guy out of that scenario.
Man, dude, you're going to meet, especially when you're special, you're going to meet dudes that look incredible on paper that are just like, you look at the resume and you're like, bro, this dude's a fucking stud. And then he gets to your team and he fucking sucks because he can't be with the team dynamic. A lot of it is that he expects certain things for himself. And that kind of goes back into you have to have, you have to be able to look at yourself. You have to be able to be humble. So have humility, but also say okay, what is my point of being here? My point of being here is to win wars, however I'm supposed to do it. And as a Green Beret, I have these particular skill sets. It's good to have skill sets. It's good to bring that tool, to have that tool in the toolbox and bring that to the table for your team. But they may not need it. Again, everything is CQB is a tool in the toolbox. All right, urban warfare, I kind of separate urban warfare from CQB, and one's very collateral damage oriented and one's not. But there's scenarios where certain things are appropriate and there's scenarios when, they're not. And the trick is what for the special operator that has that experience is he can shift from one to the other super, super quickly. And so he says this isn't working, I'm going to do this. So it's if I'm going to hit a target house, I'm going to use my rural sneaky, tactics to get in there. Then I'm going to go into the house and treat it like it's a CQB style scenario. But oh shit, there's a fucking machine gun nest or whatever in there. CQB goes out the fucking window. Then it turns into what I consider urban combat, which is, or mount or whatever like that, where collateral damage heavy. And you're just you don't need to go fucking flood the hallway. You need to fucking throw grenades. You need to drop bombs. You need to do whatever. And it takes a certain, honestly, you have to, it takes individuals that have that experience of saying I can switch from one to the other, right off the bat. And because that's what you have to do. You have to be able to assess yourself and say this particular tool is not what's needed right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's the only thing I could think of the whole time you were talking there is self-assessment.
Yeah.
We're really good at it early on in our careers of self-assessing, and somewhere along the way you think you reach the pinnacle or you're too good or whatever it is, and you quit self-assessing and looking at yourself and trying to find your weaknesses and fix them. But as long as you can maintain that awareness to step away from yourself and how great you are and say, what am I missing? What have I not trained on recently? Whatever it is, so that you can self-assess and correct.
That's part of the trick, though, right? I'd like to hang here for just a second because I think, especially with our listening audience, this is where the gold is so far. If you're very good at it early on and you slip, then part of your mentality is, well, I know I'm good at self-assessing. I'm not seeing anything, right? So to have to trust that external source, that's a difficult shift. And I understand that, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of if you're going to look at the champion, boxing or something like that, or mixed martial arts, the mixed martial artist who's the number one in the world. That is literally for seconds at a time. He may have won that bout that night, but somebody somewhere is training to beat him, and it's only a matter of time before they exceed him. You are never the best at anything. If you're the best at anything, it is for an extremely limited amount of time before somebody else is better. And special operations dude, there's always younger dudes that are more fit. There's always younger dudes that are smarter. There's always dudes that are waiting to take your spot on the team, and they're not just pieces of shit either. These are good dudes. And so being able to, I think your mindset helps you and we talked about like stoicism, things like that. Admitting to yourself that you're not Superman, admitting to yourself that you're not God's gift to warfare, knowing that there's always someone better. And it's kind of like, I mean, I hate saying it's like that, like while you're sleeping, someone is training to kill you. While you're getting complacent, someone is getting better, like in one way or shape or another. And just because you're good at something doesn't mean shit. You just, I mean, because you may not have you could be like, if I was the best, I don't know, if I was the best sniper in the world, I might go on deployment and I may never pull out my sniper rifle. It's just the way it is. It's right time, right place. You have to be able to be humble enough to look back, be introspective. You know, when we do our AARs after everything, you have to be real about doing AARs. Because I mean, there's a lot of dudes in the community that whenever they do stuff, they really don't go through, and you probably know, they don't really do really good AARs. Yeah. A lot of that is going to be up to the commander. And whether how bad the commander really wants to pursue that. And I think they're extremely important because, you know, hindsight is always 20/20, no matter what you do. And then if you can't non-emotionally, and again, this is going away with emotions and like disregarding, you know, the ego of yourself and saying that I can non-emotionally say that I need to get better at this. And whenever you receive a correction, you can non-emotionally receive that and say, they're not wrong. Like, I need to be better at this, and this. A lot of guys, like, especially, and it's hard, man, especially like when you're in the community for a while and you've like, if you're in like whatever, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like if you've self-actualized, it's difficult to go back, if that makes any sense. Sometimes it's difficult to receive criticism by somebody that you don't think deserves to criticize you.
Yeah.
And we're all guilty of that. And that's okay. I think the main thing is like no one should ever be a bigger critic of you are than you are to yourself. Like, I'll just repeat that again. Nobody should ever be able to talk any shit or be any bigger critic about what you do or how you did stuff than you are to yourself. Like, nobody. If they tell you that you did something sucky, like, they would never be able to say it worse than what you would say to yourself.
That's not new information.
Yeah, that's right. I agree.
Yeah. I agree.
And but that's a lot of people do have trouble with that.
Well, I think part of it too for me is having discussions about capacity. Like, how do you talk to a Green Beret about capacity, especially as a civilian? I mean, most of us, I don't understand my capacity. I've never been taken to that line. And when you have, and you're trying to make assessments on your own capacity, and someone's speaking into your life, into your career about your capacity, it turns into a big F you. Like, you don't know. I know about my capacity. What do you know about my capacity? Who are you? There's that skepticism and cynicism that emerges, and it's founded, is the point I'm trying to make. It's not coming out of nowhere. There's a lot of history there with you as an individual and your experiences and doing the right thing, not just, you know, when no one's looking, but when you don't want to. And somebody meets you with the little external accountability, and God forbid tells you need to take a knee because you're not right now, and you need to take, and all these things start swirling around. There's somebody who's been training that's ready to take my spot on the team, and you don't understand what you're trying to ask of me. This stuff gets very complicated, and I would say very emotionally driven.
And again, you have to separate yourself from your emotions. I think so. So let's use World War I as an example. World War I, it was a super high casualty rate. Is that trench warfare, and why was that? It was like traditionally they tried to fight like they did 30 years ago, which is what happens in every war. But all of a sudden they have these super high casualty producing weapons. They have machine guns. They have tanks. Really, let's start off with machine guns. They have machine guns. So it's like getting online and doing these mass assaults, they don't work anymore because you have machine guns. But the generals are still going to fight like they did. They're still going to send these assault waves, and then all of a sudden they get mowed down. So what do they do? So let's build some trenches. We got to do this. Then they have artillery that comes in. So it's like all it is an evolution. You're going, like, dude, you're gonna get old, man. You're gonna get old. What you were good at is gonna get outdated at one point. You have to evolve. If you're gonna do well in warfare, you have to evolve. Look at like machine learning. Like, look at like what's happening as far as like robotics now. Like, dude, okay. We're imperfect creatures. We talk about being non-emotional all the time, and we have ethics, and these are all really good things. So what's going to happen when our leader wants us to do something and we have, I don't know, we have a moral conundrum, whatever, for whatever reason. Like, so really the perfect soldier is not, I mean, we could say he's a machine, but we have ethics. I think that's what makes us better at our job, especially in Green Berets, is like, because if you have ethics and you have morals, but really if you look at what a perfect fighter is going to be like a robot. It's going to be a machine. Mm-hmm. And don't think that it's not going to evolve that way, because it is. And honestly, like, the future of warfare is somewhat terrifying to a point, because you can see that. But like, machines don't say no. They don't have trouble with conscription. They don't have trouble back home. They don't get drunk and get DUIs getting back on the base.
I hear a lot of United States Marine coming out of it.
But this is real. I mean, these are real things. So it's like, you know, why, if you were if you were going to speak pragmatically, why wouldn't you morph into that? And the thing is like, we may have some moral thing that's going to say like, okay, I don't want to use machines in warfare like that or whatever, but you know the enemy is. Mm-hmm. I mean, so if you had a country with a population that may not be able to conscript as many soldiers or do whatever, why wouldn't they go for more advanced like robotic technology or something like that to replace that individual soldier on the ground, which they see as a weak point?
3D printers should send chills down everyone's spine.
Well, and the only reason I'm digressing a lot, but the reason I'm getting into that is like, that is an evolution of warfare. You know, the whole thing about ODAs now is like, you know, they're going to have like a robotics guy on the ODAs and stuff. Yeah. And some people are like, oh, whatever. And you're like, bro, that is an evolution. Like, honestly, I trained when I originally did my marksmanship training, or my, you know, whatever you qualify. I did it all open sights, and this is the Marine Corps. So it's like a 500 yard, range, open sights, whatever. And then all of a sudden they're going to like fucking ACOGs, and you're just like, bro, come on, man. Now, I mean, and I still have arguments where I think open sights are obviously good, but they're not wrong. I mean, like, we can afford to put optics on every weapon, and they increase lethality. Period. So it's like, you know, why not qualify with them? But that's an evolution. And it was hard for me to come out of that. It was hard for me to say that this, and this. But yeah, I mean, you have to continually self-assess. You have to be humble, and you have to learn that, you know, be humble enough to realize that you're not the best and that you have to evolve.
All right, let's shift the conversation a little bit, because you're leading right into it, in that once you shift worlds, and I wouldn't even say on the precipice, you've been straddling this for quite a while. All these things we've discussed up until this point for an hour and change. What do you do when you step into my world as a civilian? Yeah. You step into your living room with your wife. Like, you want to talk about problematic. This stuff gets very, very problematic. Oh yeah. And we even had Dr. Free on the podcast a few episodes ago talking about this. Jordan and I, when we're traveling around inside of the formation, talking about operator syndrome. Mm-hmm. This language is kicking up, and people are becoming familiar with it. Your take on it, a little bit different, which should not surprise the audience. But as a thinking man, pseudo philosopher, how do you think about this shift of developing these skills, thinking about life and courage and honor, all those things this way, the practicality of killing, and then you are in a relationship where a lot of that stuff is measured on a different scale?
Yeah, and that's interesting. I'd say the way to think about it is like, and we talked about this earlier, like the goal of an operator is not to survive combat. That's not our goal. Our goal is to thrive in combat, to be the best on the combat field that we can be. So in order to do that, there's always people are going to label it differently. People call it paranoia. I always say like enhanced situational awareness. I think that's probably a number one thing that a lot of people, when they immediately look at a veteran, they're like, oh, they have PTSD or whatever. A lot of it is simply that enhanced situational awareness. And they have to understand this, like, that's not, for us, that's a survival mechanism. And I'm not saying it's one of those things where we're presented with these potentially dangerous scenarios where we have to act very, very quickly. And so situational awareness, or enhanced situational awareness, allows us to take in as much as we can and to react as much as we can, in order so we can have a reaction time that's appropriate, so we can, you know, basically try to counter whatever the enemy is throwing at us. So there's so there's that. So you have your enhanced situational awareness, and that goes into exactly what you said, is like, scanning rooftops, or looking for exits whenever you do, looking for cameras. It's really funny because it's like whenever you're with a bunch of Green Berets and you're out in town, it's really, at least for me, like now, it's like we're always sort of fighting over who can sit facing the exit, and you do it sort of like unconsciously, and it's not. I mean, it's not, I don't think it's pathologic. It can't obviously get pathologic. I don't think it's always pathologic. It's just, you can take it to a point where it starts to paralyze you when you're when you are out in public. And that, it sucks.
A few weeks ago, we were on the road, and we had done our jobs, and it ended in the evening by having a beer, which was an awesome experience for me personally. We filter outside because we got kicked out because it was closing time. And about 5 minutes into the conversation, I realized, holy shit, I'm the only guy with my back to the street. Yeah. There was like 10 of us, and I was the only non-Green Beret. The Green Berets all had their back to the establishment we had just walked out of, and they were facing the street. And I'm the only civilian, standing out like, yeah, no problem. We're just in the middle of this town, and, anywhere USA. But it was just habitual, and I wouldn't not say that any of the men I was with at that time, man, they've got operator syndrome, PTSD. It was just, no, this is what we do. We're all acting similarly because we've been in situations where we had to.
And their training should reinforce that. That's the thing. It's not just like going to combat. Like, they should train to reinforce that. That's a survival instinct that's extremely good, and it will help them. And they should have that, hopefully. I think to couple with that is, like, we are so used to having this, so we're used to gaining fire superiority, I guess. So we always develop this overwhelming response. And so because, it's like fight or flight. You're going to have a bunch of catecholamines. You're going to be rushing through. You're going to be, have the fog of war, all those things like that. Because you want to have this overwhelming response to the enemy. You want to gain fire superiority. You want to be able to maneuver them. You want to be able to kill them. And in order to do that, so you have to have the situational awareness in order to perceive the threat. And then you have to have the aggression to overcome the threat. There's nothing wrong with that either. Because if you look at, again, it kind of goes back to what are laws and these are all holograms in our mind. And so it's like when we're back and we see what we perceive as a threat, even if it's in America, like we don't really see hopefully we do sometimes. It just depends, but it's hard. We don't really always, a lot of, you can say it's training, you can say whatever, but like we're there to basically overwhelm the threat, suppress the threat. There's really not a lot of laws that are involved with that, if you understand what I mean.
I do.
And so that is, I will say, extremely difficult to suppress. Where I think it helps is, again, kind of the whole suppression of emotions type thing. Most of the things that are here, most of the things that happen in America, not always, there's times when it's very, very appropriate. Most of the things that happen they elicit an emotional response within us. And we do what we always do. We overwhelm, retribution is disproportionate, if that makes any sense.
I think we just stumbled into our episode title.
Yeah.
And it does make a lot of sense. However, for the people who are in those situations that are our offspring or our spouse, it really doesn't make sense in the moment.
So essentially, and I do want to touch on this, is like, so what we talk about is this overwhelming response. And so when we're presented with physiologically, when we're presented with a dangerous situation, our body's flooded with catecholamines, we have leukocytosis, we're basically ready to fight or run away, either one. But either way, they both do it. Our muscles are just engorged with more blood. We're basically ready for action. And this is a normal sympathetic response. And again, emotions can control us to a point, but this just happens. The thing is we train to reach this response. You should train to mimic this response as much as you can, because it is that response that sort of gives you that sort of fog of war. And it is that response that leads that, and we also train to, again, overwhelm the enemy. We fix, suppress, overwhelm, maneuver, and destroy. I mean, that's what we do. Or that's what you should do anyway. And that, to me, is where it becomes difficult and can become pathologic. And it's interesting. So I didn't mention this before. So I'm also a doctor as well, like a physician. And so it's kind of like when if you ever go to the doctor and they ask you how many drinks that you're drinking or whatever like that a week or whatever, and they give some cheese dick answer, there was like 2 to 3 or whatever, and we're all drink more than that.
Right.
Anyway, but it's one of those things where it's like, and oh God, I'm also probably going to get a lot of ostracization by physicians, but I don't think addiction happens when it starts to interfere with your daily life. Like, so you can do certain things which may be vices or maybe, against the status quo, whatever. But until they start to interfere with your daily life or other people's lives, that's when I think it becomes, quote unquote, like pathologic. And so having an enhanced situational awareness isn't bad. Having this overwhelming response, that's not bad. It's just more of how you work to control it in your daily life, because you also have to admit to yourself, you're like, my environment is changed. My environment is not, Afghanistan, Iraq, Africa, freaking wherever, Syria, wherever. Like, this is home. So it's like my response is different, even though I've been training for years and years how to respond. There's certain situations when having an overwhelming response is extremely necessary and probably life-saving, and like your average one, maybe not. But I mean, this type of response becomes, we always say muscle memory, but it is, and it should become that way. And I think, I think that whenever people look at veterans, that enhanced awareness and that sort of weird, it's like an alien response to them, that's when they're like, oh, that's PTSD. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I mean, so essentially, if I was to have, again, this awareness and this overwhelming response, like, so if I was to get into a fight at a bar, as a civilian, and again, we're going to get into the whole whether fighting is good or bad, but like, if you were to get,
I feel like we covered that.
Yeah.
I know, but still, there's still going to be people that are whatever. But you get into a fight at the bar, like, usually it's just like, okay, you're going to take it to a level to where the other person is no longer harming you or somebody else, and then you stop. Well, for us, it's difficult because we're there to neutralize the threat. And so a lot of the times it's difficult for us to press pause on that. It's difficult for us to rein in that aggression. And to be quite honest, that's a good trait. I mean, whenever you're in combat, you always want to rein, especially as a leader, you always want to rein your troops in. You want them to be overly aggressive. You would much, much rather rein them in than try to push them out. So but again, that comes with the price. And so the price is that it's difficult for them to do that back in the rear. Mm-hmm. And so, and that's why you have military towns. There's always bar fights. There's always like whatever, because I mean, these are rough individuals, and these rough individuals are who you want to fight wars. Mm-hmm. Period. You don't want Boy Scouts. You want rough dudes.
I think even the largest pacifist would say that.
Yeah.
At some point. But the point I'm trying to pull us back to here is when it does become mm-hmm. problematic.
Yes.
Because I think there are men listening. I know there are men listening. Like, man, this is causing me issues, and I kind of disagree that it is an issue, but it is an issue. I can't make it go away.
I think it's somewhere in the middle that you have to come to and understand that it's neither good nor bad, like we were talking mm-hmm. about earlier. Mm-hmm. It is good in the right situation. Yes, overseas it's good. Mm-hmm. It's even good here, that 1% of the time that you need it. It's good. So I think what you do with that feeling of sympathetic overdrive or sympathetic nervous system kicking in, mm-hmm. What you do with it determines whether it's good or bad. Now, it can go down the bad just off the label of saying that that's PTSD.
Sure.
That's not necessarily the case. We have to be able to look at it and not give it any sort of label that, if I sit with my back to the wall where I can see the exits and my wife doesn't understand that, maybe trying to explain that to her without, overwhelming fire superiority, like being like, this is why I'm the way I am, and getting frustrated. I think it is stepping back and not just self-assessing, but looking at, somewhat assessing her. What does her life experiences look like? Or the crowd that you're with, they've not lived what I've lived. They don't see it this way. So if I explain it to them now, it doesn't look like PTSD anymore. It just looks like you were exposed. You've had some life situations that created this. So it's neither good nor bad. It just is.
Yeah.
I think, all right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my civilian life, because I think that's what's kind of helped me. Is that cool?
Yeah.
So back, I think it was after like my 4th or 5th deployment. I can't remember, maybe 4th. Whatever. Anyway, back when I came back one of the times, I sort of told myself, I didn't like, I'm not a militaristic person. I really don't like the military. I do like to fight. I really don't like the military. I don't do great in it. So I told myself, and that was another thing too, is like, I told myself I didn't want to be, and forgive me for saying this, I didn't want to be that old sergeant major that still lived in the barracks, that like had no family, and then all of a sudden he retires and he has absolutely nothing. He's basically just, going to the VA, and just, he's not really a productive member of society anymore. He was, but not anymore. Is that okay to say? Okay.
Painting a picture. Yeah.
All right. That being said, I didn't want to be like that. And so I was like, okay. And I always saw, and again, and this is also secondary to the fact that like, my friends are getting fucked up, so if I get my legs blown off, and I mean, I'm not going to stay in the military. If I get my legs blown off, I can't fight. I'm not going to stay in the military. I don't like the military. I just like to fight. So I forced myself to go to college, and that was interesting. So I forced myself to go to college. While I was there, I was fortunate to have some really good mentors. They I was originally going to be like a physical therapist or something. They kind of pointed me in the direction of like, why don't you try doing medicine? And I was not, again, nobody in my family's a doctor, nobody, whatever. But and I was just like, I'm not smart enough. I mean, I graduated 6th from last in my high school. Like I took the ACT like drunk. And so I was just like, dude, I don't think
maybe the most Green Beret thing you said whole podcast.
I was like, dude, I don't think I'm your dude. And they were like, well, why don't you just, take the MCAT, like, which was the medical school test. They were like, your grades are really good. Take the MCAT. And I really like science a lot. Like I've always really liked science. So I'd already done all my hard sciences no matter what. And so I did that. I took the MCAT. I actually did pretty decent on it. And then I got into medical school, went through medicine. Once I was there, I was starting to, again, this is all a backup plan for me. So this is a backup plan in case I get my legs blown off, because originally what I wanted to do is I just wanted to go fight. I never thought I was going to live past the age of 30. I never thought I was going to survive combat. I didn't want to.
Is that real?
Huh?
That's real?
Yeah, I didn't want to. I wanted to like die gloriously on the fields of battle, like with my friends. I just wanted to fight. I just wanted to fight and just, dude, dying is not hard, man. Living is hard. I mean, does that at least echo?
Yeah, man, that's truth. That is truth. And I think most guys, and we talked about this as well. Most guys accept death pretty early on.
Yeah.
That I may not come home, so it's way easier to do my job and be really good at it.
Yeah.
If I just accept it. Otherwise, I'm just going to be sad, and I'm going to be hung up on this thing that is going to prevent me from doing my job, and then that's even more dangerous. And it's more dangerous to me and the men around me. So I'm going to accept death. Now that can become problematic also when you come home and you're not really living life.
You can become problematic on deployments.
That's true as well. But there's like this weird like hairline place of accepting it and still being productive and still being
hell yeah. No, I mean, like if you like, so every deployment I went on with the idea that I wasn't coming home. And okay, and that, how we talk about expectations, I think other people do that, and they go on these deployments and they don't really see the action they wanted to, and then all of a sudden they mentally prepared themselves to die, and they didn't.
Yeah.
And now they don't know what to do. And so
that's a hell of a place to be.
No, it is. And I mean, and so don't get me wrong, like mentally preparing yourself to die is fine. That's what you're supposed to do. That's good. That's a good way to approach it, at least for me. When we talked about dudes that or to the point where it's almost like suicidal. And to me, it's kind of funny because we were talking about somebody else earlier. It's almost like as soon as you always, and everybody's seen it, like where there's a dude on deployment who just broke up with his girlfriend, and all of a sudden he's taking like a shit ton of risks that he normally wouldn't take. And so courage, and again, courage to me is not like the absence of fear. Courage shouldn't exist in the absence of fear, because there'd be no point of courage. You're going to do whatever risky thing anyway. If you're not scared, then it's not courageous. You're just doing it. But like courage is just being scared and still doing it. Putting yourself in that mindset of I'm not coming home, then coming home, coupled with your friends that did not come home, I think is extremely hard on people. Because a lot of the brotherhood that we have is like, it's like we always call it survivor's guilt. Like, it's a real thing. Like, why wasn't it me? Like, I was a single dude, like, whatever, when my friends were getting killed, and they had fiancés, they had kids, they had whatever. I'm just like, why'd they deserve to die? Like, they weren't any special. And the thing is, another thing too, is like a lot of the people that get killed in combat are not the people that they're not the people you expect to get killed in combat. They're not like, a lot of it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of funny, maybe ironic really, but like, it's like, usually it's like these meat-eating warrior people, blah, blah, blah. You're like, oh, that dude's going to get, he's going to go down in a blaze of glory. And he doesn't. A lot of the times it's like just a normal kind of, just a normal dude who is, they're good at their job or whatever, but a lot of the times, like, it's just not who you would expect. I'll put it like that.
Right.
Because again, it's just time and place. It just depends. And so that survivor's guilt is extremely difficult to get over. And the thing is, it's like, so again, like, you do these things where you suppress your emotions enough. And because again, in a combat scenario, you want to suppress your emotions to where you get the job done, you complete your mission and whatever. You're going to have plenty of time to think about shit afterwards. Whenever you suppress, because I would probably say I'm a fairly emotional person, even though I do my best to suppress them all.
Same.
So the weird thing is I remember, like, for years after my deployments, I would just start, and it was weird. Like, I don't know what triggered it, I don't know whatever, but man, I would just start breaking down crying for no real reason. And it would happen usually like once a month. A lot of the time it was around Memorial Day, when I was just like, I did this thing to remember my friends, which we'll get into later. But all of a sudden you would just start like tearing up, and it was like you had to just have this like cathartic emotional moment. And you needed it.
That's right.
And then you got over it, and then you continued about your business. Yeah. But the weird part was, it was like, I didn't know when it was going to hit sometimes.
Man, I think about it like this, that there's a lot of tears that needed to be shed, and there wasn't the time or the place. And for whatever reason, later on, they just find their way out. So you can express that emotion, that energy, that energy charge through laughter or crying, but one of them's got to happen.
Yeah.
So if you don't do that and you just keep balling it up, then it becomes problematic too. But
I agree, and I think that goes in with like the again. So what we keep talking about is overwhelming responses. So a lot of these are triggered by these emotional responses, especially here. And so I remember specifically, I was in a bar in Virginia or something like that, and I just got back from a deployment, and my friends got killed, and like some of my friends got killed, and so. It was there was this dude, and I can't remember. He was basically like faking it, he was like the bartender actually, but he was basically talking about how, he was in combat and like blah, 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 blah. And you could just tell he was full of shit. I mean, he kept saying that like, he was something stupid. He kept saying like we didn't need grenades, like we could empty our shells into a fucking sock or something like that. And he was basically describing like the sticky bomb and Saving Private Ryan. And so I'm just sitting here like about to go, and he's talking to and I was there visiting one of my friends, and I'm just sitting there like I literally about to just blow this motherfucker up. And like, it's weird because it's like, you have this like respect for your friends that you want other people to have, but they don't know them. And it's just like, they don't know to respect these people. And that's what, a lot of this thing is like, we don't like to tell stories, and I like that. I like being like the silent professional. I don't like to tell stories. I don't like to do, when I'm drunk and around friends I do, but like, they don't know. Like, they don't know what your friends were or what they meant or the sacrifice that they made. That's not their fault. They just don't know. So they don't know to respect them. So anyway, for part of survivor's guilt is like, in my mind, I just morphed this guy, like talking all this shit, to just disrespecting all my dead friends. And I'm telling you, man, and that leads you down a bad place. That leads you down to like where you're just like, again, laws are an ideological hologram. Like, they don't mean anything to you. You just want to fuck this dude up. Luckily, you should have a good whatever. I was always so.
Whoa, go back. How did it? I'm still in Virginia. How did this go?
Like, it was
safety.
My friend.
Who was there with you?
It was my friend, and you know, she was a really good friend of mine that I had met when I was there in FAST and all that stuff. And like, I was just visiting her again, and she was actually just a really good friend. And she just sat and talked to me, and I tried to explain to her like why I was mad. And I was also, man, and I have this thing where it's like so I used to do a lot of mixed martial arts, and mixed martial arts is great. And I think it's I think it's a great tool to have, because this is incredibly humbling too, because everybody deserves to get punched in the face, man. Everybody deserves to get punched in the face and be humbled. Because you don't know who's going to kick your ass. Like, that bartender could have wiped the floor with me, because I was having an emotional response. You don't go into a fight with emotions, period. And you learn that in martial arts. Like, you're like, hey, control your breathing, control your energy, strike when you're supposed to, and then, control everything else. So that sort of, I had this like thing where I was always like really polite, and I never wanted to be like an asshole. So usually if I was going to fight somebody at a bar, I would usually go up to him and be like, look, I'm sorry, I don't want to come off like an asshole, but I really think that we should fight. And they would, of course, they're just like, what the fuck? And I was trying my best not to suppress my emotions as much as possible, but I wanted blood. So I was just like, whatever. It never really worked. Usually by that point, the situation got diffused and luckily, because it was me, I didn't just jump into the situation. A lot of the times it was like I wanted permission to fight. Like, I wanted us to meet on a field of battle, so to speak, I wanted to turn it into, something that was honorable and not just me being an asshole or something like that. But so I do think the mixed martial arts aspect of it helps, and having like a friend base that would talk you down helped. But that's the reality, though. I mean, looking back, you're just like, that dude he wasn't disrespecting me. He was an asshole, and he was whether he knew it or not, he was disrespecting all those people that made that sacrifice.
Right.
But he didn't know my friends. And it was an inductive leap for me to say that he was disrespecting my friends, but he was. I mean, when you do fake that kind of stuff and you do, say those things for attention, just like, we have people all the time that do that in the community, in the special operations community, who, do things that they didn't earn, do whatever. I mean, it's disrespectful to the people that did do it. I think knowing that, had that guy known that, he probably wouldn't have done what he did. But at the same time, though, I mean, that survivor's guilt coming fresh off of whatever, like that sort of like morphs into this overwhelming response that is very, very difficult to come down from.
Yeah, no doubt. I hear you talking too, like there's a lot baked into what you're saying, which I think is maybe always the case. But the idea of purpose is in here.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In that I'm struggling now that I'm in this arena, owning a purpose, finding a purpose, because the purpose that you had before was so strong and is attached to sacrifice, loss of friends, death, all of these things we've talked about over the course of this episode. So how do you, as a man with that background, sit in a bar in Virginia and grab onto the sense of purpose that seems to be very elusive when compared to?
So purpose is an interesting thing, I think, at least for me. Like, special operations, or at least the military in general, is very purpose driven. So everything you do is like surrounding like a mission, even like mission pre-deployment training scenarios in general. It's like you have a mission, you have a purpose, and it's like throughout your entire thing that's there, and it's incredible too, because like not only do you have a purpose, but like, man, dude, you have like the entire nation behind you. You have the entire U.S. military war machine behind you on this particular mission. It's kind of an exciting feeling, to be quite honest. And so knowing that you have you were designated to complete this mission, and no matter what happens, like if something happens to you, hopefully the entire might of the U.S. military is coming to either help you out or rescue or do whatever. But you're designated for this. That's a very powerful feeling. And again, it kind of goes into like the whole like self-actualization. Now, the problem is I think it just sort of feeds into your ego as well. Ego, enemy to ego, and emotions sort of go hand in hand, and you really need to suppress that as much as you can. But when you get back home, man, there's really no more mission, so to speak. There's no more purpose. I mean, like I talk to my friends all the time. Like, dude, one of the things I miss the most is just being in the woods, like with a rifle in my hand in the dark, just walking. Like either going towards a mission or do whatever. The mission itself, yeah, sure. But like, I mean, I don't know. It's just that feeling. And you're just with all your brothers that are surrounding you. You all have one like-minded goal. They would walk through fire for you just like you would do it for them. And you're all together on this purposeful mission to go do something. And it's an incredible feeling. And you can't find it anymore. It's just like you come back to the civilian world, and it's just like having the relationships or having the brotherhood, the bond that you had is difficult to maintain, or it's difficult to get out in town because you don't have the common ground that you did with all your brothers. Like they didn't go through shit with you. You know, they didn't go through the crucible of whatever you went through, and that's what builds that bonding. It's difficult to go do that if you're like, I'm going to go to my like accounting practice and go get drinks with them afterwards. You know what I mean? I'm not making fun of accounting, but I'm just saying, and it was like for me in medicine, like it's difficult for me to like, you know, I still made friends, I still did whatever, but like, I mean, I felt like I was like kind of floating through stuff to begin to, if that makes any sense. I didn't feel like I did make some really, really good friends. Don't get me wrong. Cause I mean, we still, you know, medicine can be difficult in its own right.
Right.
And it was in a similar way, but like to have like that level of bond that I had before, I mean, no, man, it's very, very difficult to find. And that purposelessness does not help because you're like, you know, where do I go? And it's difficult to find that same feeling of purposefulness that you had.
When I look, and I bring him up often in this part of the conversations, but to me, that's the haunting. Like when I look at my father, that's the haunting I see in his eyes. He wouldn't term it this way, but it feels like our conversation has led to this. Like you guys live among and walk among the uninitiated. And how do you explain that? How do you get around that? How do you own it? I mean, these are all very big questions because that's not going away. Like the large majority of the population, hopefully, is not going to have the experiences that you guys have had. So what do we tell our listeners today that are listening to this right now on the long run or on the long drive? How do you navigate that space? Because you're obviously very capable, very elite, highly trained human beings. There must be something to point towards that feeling.
Oh man, that's kind of different for different people. For me, finding purpose outside of the uniform, you know, I've been off an ODA for 18, 24 months now. And that I agree, it's extremely difficult to come to terms with. And then the other word I would say that coming away from a team is lonely. Like that's probably the best description I can come up with it in my mind. So what I have done is I had to find like the different layers of, I had to find something deeper, like go deeper and deeper and deeper on something that's not going to give. And so for me, it's faith, it's Christianity, it's finding something that can go beyond this life for me, because I can lose my team, obviously. I can lose my career. I can lose my wife, my kids, all my materialistic things. So I had to find something deeper, not tangible. And for me, that's where it is. Now, for somebody else, it's going to be different things. And then if I were going to attack the lonely side is, staying plugged in. Like, this is a great opportunity listening to this podcast or go into events, because there's events everywhere for our guys to stay in touch, because it does end. And we've started saying that in HPW, you know, what are you going to do when you take this uniform off? Mm-hmm. Because it does go away. So start thinking while you're in uniform, what am I going to be? Who do I want to be when I walk away from this? Because we have a real bad habit of saying, I am a Green Beret. We may not say it out loud as much, but we definitely say it in our heads, like, especially in weak moments. If you're a Green Beret, like, we can keep going, keep pushing, keep going. What is it? You're not really. You're not a Green Beret. That's something you work. That's something you do. That was your career path. It does highlight a lot of character traits and personality that you already came with, and it probably developed some of those. But that's not who you are. So that same person that thrived there can thrive other places. You just have to learn how to adjust and adapt and continue learning and self-assessing. What do you think, Wood?
No, I know that's a really good point. So, like, we were talking about operator syndrome and stuff like that, and that was sort of this like constellation of problems. A lot of them were like kind of a medical, psychosocial type things, and I believe them. I do think that the problem that we have as far as reintegrating is we were once these just high level beings. A lot of us are getting older. A lot of us have orthopedic problems. A lot of us have, we weren't what we were.
Right.
And it's like, how do we value ourselves? Like what drives our self-worth? And so cause a lot of us were, again, man, we were like, especially for me, like, man, going through medicine, like, as a sniper, as a Green Beret sniper, I was self-actualized. I was pretty good at my job, to the point where a lot of people would call me just for opinions and things like that. And I felt, I tried to be, I was very humble. Like, a lot of people had better experiences than I did. A lot of people were better than me, but I was decent at my job. And all of a sudden I'm starting over. All of a sudden, like, for me, I'm an orthopedic surgeon now, but like, I was a fucking PGY-1, which is basically like the lowest of the low.
Right.
And I'm just like, you motherfuckers.
Yeah.
And and it sucks. But the thing is, it's like, again, man, getting punched in the face is not always pleasant, but it really is a pleasant experience, like once you're done with it. And it is so, so good for you. I think that's the big thing. It's like the lowered self-esteem and lowered self-worth. You got to work towards building it back and realizing that you have to evolve. And you weren't going to be that same operator. You're going to do something different. One of the things that really helped me when I was as far as transitioning, using that word, transitioning out of the military.
Let's talk more about that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, let's do that. No, it was like, I really wanted to help. Like, I knew that I wasn't gonna, like, man, I would love to stay an operator forever. I think all of us would, man.
Absolutely.
I would love being on a team forever. I would love all this stuff. I know it's not gonna happen though. And so that was even like that stupid little manual thing that I started writing. I was writing that like purely because like I still wanted to reach people after I was gone. Like, I still wanted to help after I was gone, because I wanted to take the good experiences, or there's no good or bad experience. There's just experience. It's all how you label it. If you had a bad experience, you label a bad experience, it's because you labeled it a bad experience. Your experiences can always teach you something, and you can always pull past those.
Wow. That's well said.
And period. Like, if you treat something like a bad experience, then I think you're looking at it the wrong way. You need to look at it from a non-emotional, say, like, that is an experience. How can I be better from it? What did I learn from it? That being said, you can always help other people, because you can help other people through their experiences they had. So I think starting off, and I made this sort of like cheese dick list here, but it was like stuff that I thought that helped me. And it's like, so for me, again, what is the basis of your self-worth? And if for us, it's like being an operator, then your self-worth is going to go to shit. That's right. Period. Like, you have to find something else. That's right. Whether, and like you said, yours was in faith. I do think that there's multiple ways to attack it. One of the things for me was like finding a fulfilling occupation. So it's going to be very difficult to find the level of what you had probably while you were in the military, but finding something that fulfills you. This is probably, to me, one of the most difficult things. So a lot of people it's like a lot of dudes that get out, you'll find that they do a lot of contract work, or they do a lot of so it's like they're out, but they're really not out.
That's right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. They're doing the same job.
Right. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, because they're doing well, but it's just more, and that's what their choice. That's completely fine. But it's like, for me, and I was going to contract for the longest time, but for me, like, I'm very happy with where I ended up. I'm very happy with what I did, because now I can actually have a family. Like, when I was in the military, I mean, dude, I didn't have a family. I dedicated, I ate, slept, and shit fucking learning how to kill other people. That was all I wanted to do.
Right.
And I didn't have time for a lot of that. And it was okay at the time. But, looking back, look what happened when I got out, man. I had nothing, If I had gotten out at that time, I would have had nothing.
No.
If I had got my legs blown off, I would have had nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so having that. So anyway, but having that fulfilling occupation, I was going to say seeking like another fraternity, sorority, whatever you want to say, basically built on mutual respect. So you're going to have that in your occupation. I think that's going to be pretty important. But the thing is, like, you have to realize that, like, starting over is going to just suck. Starting over to a new career a lot of the time sucks. And I'm not, again, I don't mean this in any sort of negative way. I think that's probably why a lot of dudes go contract instead of, like, starting over another career.
Right.
Because realistically, dude, I'm 42 right now. I have, all of a sudden I'm alive. All of a sudden I didn't die in combat. I didn't die gloriously on the fields of battle like I wanted to. And now I'm here. What the fuck?
Yeah, you could live your lifetime again.
Right, exactly. That's the thing. It's like there's a whole nother life that you don't even know about. And so, and if you, dude, man, and the thing is life, whatever, but like what we are, like, as biological entities is so against nature. It's incredible. We're just this, like, plasma membrane of different gradients. And the fact that we're, like, have what we are now, and what we are, and, like, how special each and every, like, thing is. And I'm speaking from, like, biology, chemist portion of it, because it's almost incredible. It's almost like, it defies the second law of thermodynamics, what we are. And so it's like, so why would you? So don't waste it. It's okay. Like, dying glorious in the fields of battle, that's your purpose, man. That's a great, honorable purpose. But you didn't do that, man. Your expectation was not met. So what do you do? And so it's difficult. So I would say another thing with that occupation, and kind of may go hand in hand, is, like, for me, the friend base is difficult. I don't think it's weird, because what you're going to do is you're going to find common ground. It's difficult for me to make friends with other males outside of the military.
Agreed.
If that makes any sense. A lot of the times that I'm friends with males outside of the military is because they do some sort of probably mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
Or for me, like, again, they're extremely good at what they do. As far as, like, for me, it's like I'm in the orthopedic surgery world. They in essence became mentors all over again for me. They were mentors for that. So the same thing that I respected in my mentors in the military was the same thing I respected in my mentors out of the military. And they became really good friends, and I respected them for a lot of the same reasons. And weirdly enough, they attack problems a lot of the same way that I think a lot of elite level special operators attack problems. And it's really, really cool. I would say, as far as community based, like, a big thing, like, for us, mixed martial artists, if you can get into that and your body's not completely destroyed, that's usually a good thing to do.
Could be a tough proposition.
It is. But it
after
is.
double hip replacement.
It's a good, I think or any sort of, like, honestly, any team sport, like, any sort of sports, you only do, like, some sort of high level activity. I think that we're so used to, like, having some sort of physical activity involved with, like, how we are as day to day. And I think that team sports, just like probably a lot of the guys, and you could probably agree with this, that do well in the military did well with team sports.
Yeah.
It's the same as when you're done.
But that's a psychology thing too, that men need to do things together before they can even hit that friendship side,
Yeah.
So that makes total sense.
I think a crease we need to talk about is, at least I interact with so many Green Berets that would tell me in response to what you're saying, that's not an ODA. That's not combat. I'm not, it's just not going to be the same. But you're saying a dose of it is better than none at all.
I mean, of course it's not going to be the same. That's the thing. They're going with it. They're going in there with the expectation of it. They're going there with the expectation that that's still them. They're not the same. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-mm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
It doesn't make sense.
Mm-mm.
So.
And Robin Sage, one of the things they do is like, you're going to go build rapport, you're going to go find common ground. You got to find common ground. You got it somewhere.
You got it somewhere. That's right.
And don't get me wrong. Like, if you're going there with the expectation that you're going to have the same relationship that you did with your dudes on the ODA, you're probably not going to make that.
That's right.
But it's probably not good for you to have that expectation.
No, it's not fair.
It's not fair. It's not fair. You have to go in there from a non-emotional standpoint, saying like, look, this is where I'm at. You know? And the thing is like, people always used to tell me all the time, they're like, oh man, thank you for your service and all that. And I hate it when people thank me for my service. I'm like, bro, I had a great time. I fucking had a blast.
Loved it.
Like, even like, they're like, oh man, do you still have nightmares? I'm like, no, bro, I want it. I want it to be there. And I'm not going to get it. But at the same time though, like, the dudes that didn't go to combat, I mean, society is society for a reason. You have different people functioning in society. So all the doctors, all the lawyers, maybe not the lawyers, but all the other, you know, all the people, these functional members of society, you know, we needed them just as much as we needed soldiers.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to now is some humility coming back in, because they know more than you about something, whatever that is.
I didn't know what a fucking mortgage was. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, just stupid stuff like that.
Like, what have you been doing with all this money for the past years?
Chuckling if she's listening to this at that moment, but I mean, it's true,
right?
Yeah, and I think that's extremely, you know, being humble. Like, you know, exactly what you just said. It's like, we can go find common ground for the G-force. We can do that's a really good way to put it. I hadn't really thought of it in that scenario, but like, I think another thing is, and this has been a huge thing for me, is like trying to stay active in some way or another. Because the thing is like, all of a sudden you've lost your purpose, you've lost your goals, and you're just like, you don't know what to do. So you become sort of complacent, and like we always say, complacency kills. Like for me, somehow you have to do some sort of physical activity to expel anxious energy. To me. So it's like, if you look at like, so, and this is kind of physiologic again, so it's like chronic stress versus acute stress. Acute stress is not bad. Acute stress is what builds you up. So it's like, you know, fight or flight, acute, like you go to the gym to get in better shape. You run to get in better shape. These are acute stressors on your body, and they help it out. Chronic stress, which is like continual cortisol, continual, you know, all the med school's coming back to me, but all those things over time, they can end up being, you know, basically catabolic on your body. They break it down. They do bad things. And so for me, like, so I still get anxious in crowds. I still get anxious at work. I still get anxious doing all these things. One of the reasons I chose the profession to be in surgery is because I can be by myself doing a particular thing, again, a purposeful mission each and every day. So it helps me. So it's like you can sort of rewire, but I still have anxious energy. And so all that court that's in your system, it's like, you have to get rid of it.
I agree.
And to me, like, what do? You recreate a stress response. You exercise.
Yeah. I
think that having some sort of physical activity, I think, is a huge, huge thing to combating a lot of, operator syndrome in general.
If you have coupled physical preparedness with a mission, and there's no mission, then engaging in being physically, like, you're recategorizing why this matters.
Yeah, rewiring.
Yeah.
And that can be whether you're like, okay, I'm going to start getting back into running. So it's like Kane he does a lot of ultras. I did a few ultras, but like he did a lot of ultras now. So it's like a lot of them are like working towards that next goal. They're working towards that next race or that next competition or the next whatever. And I think that's good because, again, purposeful, mission driven, everything. You're sort of rewiring what you want.
Yeah, it definitely cuts against the grain of society, though, it doesn't. I mean, our society is monetized inactivity. It's trying to trap everyone. Well, actually has trapped everyone there. So, now you're talking about acting differently. If you're talking about ultras or 14ers or whatever the thing is, like, man, I don't know a lot of guys doing that. So you're separating yourself out from the pack in a way. Yeah. That's why the humility becomes so important. I mean, part of why I'm interjecting here in this part of the conversation is this is a really complex life strategy that you don't fall into by accident. You have to continually be 100%. Working at this side of things.
You got to be intentional for sure.
100%. Yeah, and if that intentionality drops because of depression or purposelessness, or look, even at a very basic level, something Jordan and I are combating every day inside the formation is lack of quality sleep. I mean, if you've gone, the last roughly decade, which these are stories that we hear regularly, and you haven't had quality sleep for 10 years, then the strategies that you're talking about right now are going to be very difficult. However, engaging in these things is what's going to help that sleep. So it's what do you guys call it? The self-leaking ice cream cone. Right? You got to figure out, like, how do I step out of this enough to engage in maybe one of the list that we're talking about now, tackling one of these things and then stacking wins subsequently.
Guys have been doing it. They've already been doing it. They just have to get to doing it again. I know that sounds it's really easy to just say it and be like, oh, you've been doing it, just keep doing what you're doing.
Tell me what you mean.
Man, I'm trying to think of a really good analogy for it. Like, feelings will follow actions. How about that? So I don't feel like going to the gym because I got a crappy night of sleep and whatever it is. But if I make myself go to the gym, the feelings will follow over time. Yeah. And then you start wanting to go to the gym. You start liking it. And then all of a sudden these goals appear in the gym. You mentioned Kane earlier. Like, he didn't just start out running ultra marathons. It's probably started out as just enough, maybe 2 miles, 3 miles, 5 miles. And then the feelings followed those actions to now more. I can go further. I can do more.
Yeah, and willpower. I mean, willpower is a muscle, man. Like, if you don't use it, you lose it. And it's interesting because I don't really plug a lot of books. There is a book called Atomic Habits, which sort of trains you how to turn something into a habit that helps you out. And I do think having that is, I think it's a good start. It's a good start in trying to get you on the right path, because once you do it enough, then it becomes part of your daily routine. Now, the problem that at least I had was trying to find time in the day to still go do things. Because I still think that, like, no matter what, and I mean, my wife and I talk about it all the time, like I still, if I don't like run or do something physical, I'm not going to sleep well that night. I just can't go to sleep.
Same.
I mean, I just can't, like, it's almost like it wears me out. It gets rid of all that stressing in your body, and you give it that out, like you're wearing yourself out, and then you can sort of get a better restful night's sleep. Now, obviously, if there's other things that are, whether it's like, obstructive sleep apnea or something like that, that's keeping you from sleep, that's obviously different. But I do think that these things help.
You called me the other night. It was very much time. The rest of the world was powering down. You called me, and I have this experience a lot. I had it this morning, actually. I don't know why Green Berets like to call people while they're doing things. That's another episode. But you're like, oh, sorry, man, I'm walking my dog through the woods, and I'm like,
it's free time. It's multitasking.
It's almost 10 p.m. What are you doing?
Yeah. So again, that was in my outlets, man. It's like I have some like trails by my house that I helped build with some community. So again, for me, getting in the community, a lot of what helped me doing was like, I helped build these trails because I like to be out in the woods, period. And so that gave me an outlet to go do that. And I do these things where I like build all these bridges, do all this construction, and it helps me to expel a lot of energy, but I can also be creative. I can also do whatever. I can rewire, what my mission, what my goals are. And so again, I just like being out in the woods and whatever. Me and my dog, we just go out in the woods at night, and I enjoy it. And so, and again, I have a limited number of time, especially with a kid. So it's like now I'm calling you at 10 p.m. while I'm walking my dog because I'm also multitasking. But yeah, I mean, that is a strategy for me. That is one of the strategies that I have.
One thing I'm picking up on too is I know we're wrapping up here with the episode, but it's okay, in fact, appropriate, necessary for these strategies to be individually based. What works for you may not work for me.
Yeah,
I think that's part of the problem with even talking about HPW. When you try to make a solution a bureaucratic solution, then you're going to miss a lot of people.
It's not cookie cutter at all.
It just doesn't work that way. And you guys were not selected in the beginning because you were all alike. They're differences, right? So the solutions that we apply at this point, as we're talking about transitioning out of career into the civilian world, then you have to be curious enough about yourself. And I think the point you were making, Jordan, is to go back in essence to the beginning. So, okay, what's most true about me? Not the things that I've leveraged or the information that I've taken in or the way I've trained myself to be a war fighter. Let's go back to the essence, back to the beginning. You growing up, being in the woods at night, no lights. You're kind of back to that in some ways, and it's medicinal.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. It's familiarity. You know, it's the closest I can get to being on a mission at night with a gun in my hand. You know, I mean, it's just it's familiarity. And I will, and it goes, and I will, and I'm going to kind of go forward a little bit too. It's like when we talked about like family and spouse relationships. I think that the guys that I know that did that took combat very, very hard, and they went through terrible scenarios where they, you know, stuff that I did not go through. One of the things that survivor's guilt does is it does where it's like you push those that love you away. And I think it's in a way it's a defense mechanism because you're trying to, in your mind, save them from you, from yourself. But you're also like, you just went through this very, very difficult thing where it's like, it's difficult to do again. It's difficult to lose somebody else again. And so that is incredibly awful to go through. And I've had a lot of friends who, I used to always look at PTSD like not many people had it, only like a few people, and they just went through some wicked shit. And they would come home, and I had this thing where it was like they either killed themselves in 2 years or they somehow sort of got over it and started doing whatever. And now, I mean, I understand there's different spectrums to the PTSD now and different way it strikes people differently, but that was a big thing, was like their families just suffered so hard because all they did was they were trying to love them. They were trying to love them, and all they did was try to push their families away. And it was just this really bad defensive mechanism they had. And I kind of went through that for a while. This is going to sound really cheesy and whatever, don't judge me with this, but I remember like I was trying to decide whether I was going to like start a relationship with a girl. Because I mean, I was like, I wanted to be loyal to my brothers that weren't there. I wanted to go and continue to fight. I remember I even had a dream where one of my dead friends even came to me and they were just like, man, it's okay. It's okay to keep living. It's okay to live. And I know it sounds cheesy and like stupid, but it was weird. It was like, okay, like I can start like starting a new chapter does not mean you're forgetting who you were or who your friends were. That's just a portion of your life. Everything that you, again, the reason why SF likes experience, because experience gives you all these scenarios. Everything in life is what brought you to where you are today. Every experience that you had is what made you and morphed you into the person that you are today. It's up to you how you take those experiences and learn from them, but they all did that. That being said, I mean, you know, well, it's just that is I don't have a formula to really get over that, but I do think that one of the things that helped me as far as like remembrance of at least my friends was like, so this, again, I don't want to get too tangential here, but it's like you'd be surprised at what you forget. Like it's so interesting as like you get older, and it's funny because you see it too. Like whenever you're out drinking with like your friends that you probably went to war with, there's stories that like you forgot until somebody brings up like an adjacent story, and you're like, oh shit! And remember, and we also did that and that and that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And so I remember like, I've lost a few friends, and I was just like, I was thinking about them, and you start to like forget their faces, and it really starts to bother you because it starts getting hazy because you start getting older and you start making new experience, all this stuff, but you start to forget their faces, and it bothered me. And then one time, like I forgot like one of their names, and this is like a good friend, and I'm just like, what the fuck? I was so fucking mad at myself for doing that. And one of the things I started doing was I started making like a little tradition as sort of remembrance. And I usually do it on like Memorial Day or Veterans Day or something like that. And this is, again, cheesy, but just this is what helped me. It was like I would take so I wrote down everything about, like, as far as like, name, date of birth, like when they died, how old they were, where they died, what happened, stuff like that. And I put it in like an Excel format and spreadsheet. And every year I saved it to a certain, whatever, my phone or whatever. And every year during Memorial Days or whatever, I would find like a spot to be by myself, and I would take a napkin or a piece of paper or something, and I would write everything, each thing about that person or each individual person, because it was a few people, and I'd write it down. And then after I wrote it down, I would just take like a lighter and light it on fire and burn it. And it was just something that I would do over and over again. And it was like a tradition that I always tried to maintain because it helped me to remember who they were. And I think that's really important. And even then, like, so I built these trails and stuff like that. I remember I built sort of like this exercise station on one of the trails. It was basically just pull-up bars and shit. But one of the things is again, it's like, they're your friends. They mean so much to you. And one of the things that's hard is like when you feel like that other people don't respect them the way that you did or knew them. So it's like, I took their names or what they were. I put like a little biography on there, put it on a plaque. And then I made like little workouts for them. So it's like, this was like, I did one the other, because it was the anniversary of when one of my friends named AJ was killed. And I was just like, hey, this is, on December the 14th, 20 years ago, AJ died in Phantom Fury in Fallujah. And this was his thing. And so I don't always get to do the workout every day, but at the same time, I posted it up, and then like maybe somebody else can see it and maybe they'll do it. It's just like how people do like the Murph on Memorial Day or something like that. It's that was just my way of trying to remember them and fulfill like what they did in my mind, to try to bring the respect that I had for them to other people, because then that helps, to me, it helps that, I'm not gonna say it's a common ground, but I think that helps, like, a lot of the reasons why a lot of guys get upset is because they don't feel like that respect is there. Because I mean, in America, respect is like, you can say it's fear, it's like whatever. And America does have like a sort of lack of respect, and it goes into what do we fear now? I mean, we don't, like most Americans don't, they fear death. You can see it going into hospitals. They fear death. They fear unknown. They fear getting punched in the face. Getting punched in the face is great for you. I'm not saying you need to get knocked out and get like brain damage, but I'm just saying,
I feel like you keep looping back to this, and I feel like you're going to come across the table. It's making
no, but it's such a, oh man, everybody should get punched in the face like once a year. I think it would just be like a good, humbling experience. But anyway, but it's just, but it's so good for you. It's so good for you to know that like somebody can wipe the floor for you out. Wipe the floor with you out there, because it makes you better.
Well, your verbiage and the way you're talking about it right now is engaging that creativity, the offload of the cortisol, the finding purpose, the humility, the understanding. I mean, this to me is another part of being elite. Yeah, is not stopping being elite. Well, now that I'm not in a green suit anymore, I'm not elite. Oh man, you don't understand. Now you've got the opportunity to apply being elite to a completely separate domain. And look, there are a lot of men that aren't doing that well. Will you be one of them? I think is the question that Jordan and I are starting to ask. Guys are getting to that 15 to 18 year mark. Depends on who they are, what their deployment op tempo has been. Like, hey, look, you have an opportunity to point being elite as something very new and different and fascinating. And if we can, wave something under your nose to wake you up a little bit to that reality, I think that the American culture is 100% desperate for men like you to engage it at that level so that we can start to believe again as men what is actually possible. Because we've lost belief in that, right? We're letting other people think for us. We're letting other people grow our food, package our food, overcharge us for our food. Speaking of mortgages, I mean, how many life decisions are based on the interest rate, and who controls that? So having you guys move in, and this is not a word that you would use, but one that I would, to move in and to infect society and culture with that way of thinking, that prior experiences need to be honored. And we need to direct creativity in the way that we're honoring those. And these names need to be remembered. And we will stop our Western ritual of being comfortable in our society. And we'll inject some things in there that will help us remember that previous sacrifices were made to get us where we are. And we're going to take our place on the timeline so that our sons and daughters will understand what came before them and what was purchased. This is a very different way to talk about life. Sure. And I think without the Green Beret moving into culture post-career, we are in grave danger of losing that completely as a society.
I mean, I think the world's going to go on. I mean, we're all going to die one day. I agree with you. I mean, like, U.S. is going to fall one day. It's fine. This is just the way it goes. We're all going to die.
Wait, I forgot to stop recording before you...
But I think that's an important thing. Is like, this is okay. Like, if we truly believe in the U.S. and we want to believe in it, then we're going to fight for it. You have to, but nothing's forever, and that's okay. Like, it's okay. Like, dying is okay. It's just, that's just the way life is. And it's how you approach it. So if you can approach it from a moment of like understanding and respect, or you can approach it from a place of fear. But the fear's not going to get you anywhere. I think, it's always funny. It's like you always saw these old like movies about, monks that go to the mountains and stuff to meditate and come to like a higher level of learning or whatever, or a different existence. And I think really all that you're searching for is just understanding. And that's really, it's understanding that this is the way the world is and it's okay, and being okay with it. And that's it. And oh man, God, that's going to lead in. Which is weird because there's so many different, we're Green Berets, man. We find different ways to attack things. Like one of the things that I do, again, just to help me out is like, I meditate, man. I learned breathing exercises. I was actually in scuba school. I learned breathing exercises. They brought like a civilian diver to come and teach us breathing exercises. I use the same things to help me. Like, we almost got shot down a lot. Almost got shot down like a lot in Afghanistan. And it was weird. It was like, because every time I'd get on a rotary or fixed wing aircraft, for whatever reason, I could feel like my heart level would start going up, whatever. I was like, and I was embarrassed. I was like, what the fuck is wrong with me? I'm not some pussy. But all of a sudden, I'm almost hyperventilating on a fucking passenger airplane or whatever. And so really, but what is like, so whenever you're looking at like whatever's making you nervous, most of the time it's going to be CO2 buildup. It's not really lack of oxygen. Most of the time it's like CO2 buildup causing this breathing response, causing this anxiety producing response that you just have to breathe. So you just got to, consciously breathing exercises help out with that. And it can calm you down to a point where you can get a hold of things like that. I mean, they're like little stupid things you learn along the way. Again, I learned this just, for diving. And this helped me like immensely. I mean, even like when you're doing these, like when you're running, I would say when you're doing these physical activities, do something to where you cannot focus on anything but that. Like if you're building something, that's what your focus is. If you're running, for me, I like to trail run because you have to pay attention to what's ahead of you. If you're running so hard that all the problems that you have in your life don't fucking matter. You just want to take your next breath. I think that's where it really truly helps me as far as that goes.
What a fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
I wish we had more time. Maybe we could invite you back in, right?
Yeah, sure.
Would you do that for us?
Yeah.
So let's just close this episode. I'm going to ask a very direct personal question if you're okay with that. So what's next for you? If we're talking about the purpose and the next thing and what we're chasing, what's next for you?
So my backup plan became somehow my primary plan, and it did it in like a good way. And this has been difficult for me to transition out of the military. It's been really weird, and it's been difficult. But so I ended up going to med school. I completed my orthopedic residency and all that stuff. So I'm an orthopedic surgeon, and honestly, I'm going to do that. I'm going to, for the first time in my life, I have a family, I have a wife, I have a kid. I have the stuff that I never had when I was in the military because I always told myself I would never do that to them because they could never come second. And now I have an occupation which fulfills me. I do love it. I can help people out. I can focus during my daily activity. I can focus. I do have to deal with people from time to time, but a lot of the times it's like I can go to a place where it's similar to when I was a sniper. It's just me and with a problem that's in front of me, which has been great. And then that doesn't have to be my life, man. Like I can go home and I can like hug my wife and I can like hold my kid. I'm just like, these are things that I never thought were in the cards for me back in my 20s, even in my early 30s. I wanted to die, but I didn't, and I'm here now. And so you just have to repurpose your life, so to speak. It is hard. It is fucking hard. And it's not just something that you just do. It's not a fire and forget thing. Like, I still go through a lot of things that I need to, do. Like I still have to do breathing exercises. I still avoid large crowds to a point. I still do these things, but I still have enhanced awareness. I still have overwhelming responses. I still love to fight, even though I broke my leg and I'm kind of breaking that. But like I still love to do pseudo mixed martial arts, even though I'd get my fucking ass kicked if I ever got in the ring with anybody because I'm so old and out of shape now. But that's great because I love getting beat up, man. It's weird, man. It's like it's just because again, that's just part of the competition. So it's like I think it's more of like, all right, man. I'm not going to try to get into something weird here, but there was this book, and it's like Krista Tippett or something. I can't remember what it was. It's called Speaking of Faith, and so faith for me is a very interesting thing because I think it's hard to go on deployments and see all these terrible, terrible things happen and say like, okay, why did God allow this when I'm fine? Or because I mean, it makes you question shit to a point. Now, don't get me wrong. They always say that there's no atheist in a foxhole. And that's kind of to a point sort of true, but because you're always just like, okay, just get me out of this fucking shit. But at the same time though, one of the things that she talks about is like, so life is difficult. Life is like, it's like the whole purpose is like, you're just seeing all this negative stuff and you're just constantly bombarded with what you consider bad experiences, things that hurt you, things that wear you down. You get older and there's a reason why a lot of us want to move out in the middle of the woods because we're sick of the society's bullshit and stuff like that. But the thing is like, so what's the purpose of life? And to her, the purpose for life was to go through all that and to still be able to like love at the end of it and still be able to like love your life or love your spouse or love. And again, it kind of reached into that whole meditative process where it's like, you came to an understanding that this is what life is. Like, this is where we're at. And you can either choose to love it or hate it. And that is purely a choice in your mind. People can drive you to that choice, but you're making it yourself. And so that in itself is what, that's what's going to drive how you approach the rest of your life.
Thank you for tuning in to the Soldier Fund podcast. If you're inspired by the stories of these elite citizen warriors and want to support their mission, visit us at thesoldierfund.org. Your contributions help us to continue to back the Special Forces soldiers of the National Guard as they fight around the world. Until next time, stay committed to stand with those who serve.